Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the second day of the conference. Welcome to those of you that are joining today and were not able to attend yesterday. I think we had a good day yesterday. I think the ECR morning went very well attended, and feedback I have from it was all very positive. Particularly enjoyed the discussion after the talks at the end of yesterday's session, and very pleased to see that the poster room was very busy yesterday looking at the posters, so that was great. Also a reminder of the posters. I know many of you have already been and had looked at the posters and probably also voted on your favourite poster, but if you haven't, please do so. We're going to close voting for the posters at lunchtime. I'm going to announce the winners of that straight at the beginning of the afternoon session. Okay, today we're looking forward to two interesting sessions. We've got one on data and then one on trials delivery. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce Tim Little, who has agreed to speak to us to give us some degree of perspective, to make it real, if you like. Tim is living with early onset dementia with Lewy bodies, and he's going to give us a talk today about his experiences. So please welcome Tim.
Good morning. I'm here with my wife Betty. When we met, Betty and I were relatively healthy. Then in 2017, Betty had a brain injury, and I became her carer. 9 months later, in 2008, I was diagnosed with a brain tumour. It's been downhill since then. I contracted MRSA, which got inside the bone flap. This resulted in significant scarring to the surface and lining of my brain, all down the right side, and the tunnel they had to make to get to the tumour. The main issues I have now are light sensitivity and with spatial awareness. On the bright side, I haven't had a migraine since then. This left us taking it in turns to be the carer. 2015-ish, I went to the GP and said, "It feels like my intellect just dropped a couple of notches." I was sent for the test only to be told, "You scored quite highly, so there isn't a problem." I thought to myself, I came to you, so there is a problem. In 2019, I went to the GP and said the same thing. She referred me to the memory clinic. 6 months later, I saw the consultant. After talking with Betty and me, I was given a preliminary diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. I was informed it could only be confirmed by a DAT scan. From seeing the GP to get the diagnosis confirmed took a total of 17 months. Yes, there were 2 lockdowns, but 17 months is too long. The final diagnosis was delivered by phone on the morning of Friday, the 6th of November 2020, during the second lockdown. To paraphrase the 30-minute call, "Your diagnosis is confirmed. Make sure your will is up to date. Put powers of attorney in place. Oh, and someone from the Alzheimer Society will contact you in 6 weeks." After a weekend with no one but Mr. Google to talk to, I wanted to go to Switzerland. Not a weekend to be repeated. A short while later, I wrote the following. "We are told the NHS is from the cradle to the grave. When you get a dementia diagnosis, it feels like you're being told, 'We've got you this far. Be a good chap and do this last bit on your own.' Why did I pay all that national insurance? Apparently it was so that I'll be looked after in my time of need. I have never been more in need. Where is this help? If I'm to do this alone, will my bus pass get me to Beachy Head, or do Dignitas do home visits? Don't worry, that isn't a safeguarding issue." It was 9 months post-diagnosis before I discovered that the caudate was the area of my brain to be affected. I was repeatedly told I didn't need to know. As I'm sure most of you know, the caudate has a lot to do with eyesight and spatial awareness. I admit admittedly limited knowledge of brain anatomy has led me to believe that when my tumour was removed, they had to cut through the caudate. Did that cause my dementia? I don't know. But if they hadn't removed it, I wouldn't have lived long enough to get dementia. I still have mental capacity, although with a diagnosis this is obviously reduced. I still function as a human being, but my cognitive ability has suffered. Things I know how to do are frequently becoming things I knew how to do. Betty is now my carer. Her needs have had to take second place as I am unable to step up. What can you do to help? More of what you are doing, please. I am no brain of Britain and never had pretensions in that respect, but even I can tell that research is essential. It is too late for me, too much damage, but I'm taking part in as much research as possible. If I leave any sort of legacy, let it be, he helped. Getting a diagnosis is a very traumatic event, not just for the person affected, but the whole family. You feel like a non-person. Some will not speak to you when they hear you have a diagnosis. After this happened to me, I wrote this. I no longer exist. I cease to exist because of your embarrassment. I would like to exist, but it appears that I need your permission. I will hide away whilst you live your life. I cannot give it to you. I will carry it on my own. I will live the remainder of my life alone. I thought I had friends. I found out quickly that most were not friends. I had mostly acquaintances. I no longer want to exist. I need your permission to not exist. I have to exist because of your embarrassment. I need your permission to exist. I don't want to be an embarrassment. I don't want to be ill. I want to live. I need your permission to live. Can I have it, or is asking your permission too embarrassing? And that isn't a safeguarding issue either. I try not to let it get me down, but it keeps catching me out. I know it's a downward slope, but at the moment I'm still enjoying the view. I wrote an article for Dementia Together, get my teeth in gear. I wrote an article for Dementia Together magazine about the disparity in funding between dementia and cancer. We are roughly where cancer was 30, 40 years ago. You didn't talk to people with cancer because they are going to die. Fortunately, a lot of those people took part in research knowing it would not benefit them in their lifetime. Most cancers are now potentially curable. They have a chance. Dementia now needs this enhanced funding that has been given to cancer research. No dementia has a cure or a vaccine. What can you do for me? Probably very little. But find a cure, or even better, a vaccine, and you will do a great deal for those yet to get dementia. Why a vaccine? Polio has no cure. It destroys lives. But the vaccine has virtually eliminated it. Prevention is better than a cure. You are the great and good when it comes to dementia research. I would ask one thing from you. Please don't get lost in the science. You might enjoy going down a certain path, but please look up occasionally to make sure it matters and will eventually help someone. We are people. We are sick. We need help. There isn't any and won't be until you fix it. Please help us.
Thank you very much, Tim. An excellent talk. Thank you. Tim has kindly offered to answer, or Betty, his wife, kindly offered to answer one or two questions if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask.
Tim, John O'Brien, thank you so much for that. That's really a powerful account and illustrates a lot of the challenges and some of the, let's face it, inadequacies that there are in care. I wondered, I know you've had some contact and involvement with research, and given this is sort of DPUK research conference, if you could say anything about your experience of finding out about research or being involved in research, or any comments that you might have about that.
Most of the information I've had about anything has come from the Alzheimer's Society. The memory clinic keep trying to discharge me, but me in an awkward side that I just won't leave. I've on a Dementia Research UK or something has a website, so I'm not sure exactly one, but you register what you've got and what you're prepared to take part in, and they send you details of the relevant studies. Unfortunately, because I had a hole drilled in my head, I can't have any scans because I would mess up the results. But if you've got any projects going and you're interested in someone to take part, Alzheimer's Society can always contact me. Does that answer the question, or?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, in which case I'd like to thank again, Tim. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I'm now going to hand over to Professor Simon Thompson, who's going to chair this morning's session.
Good morning, Bordeaux, as we say in Wales. I'm excited to be here. This is the third conference, and each year it's really interesting to see how DPUK is growing. When we started, we were talking about how the plumbing and the methodology, and now we're talking about the great science that's been enabled. So I'm Simon Thompson. I'm a Professor of Health Informatics from Swansea University, and I'm an Associate Director for DPUK. But I'm also the Director of CERT, which is the technology platform behind the DPUK portal. So the theme of this is Omics to Linkage. Now, clearly, the marketing people went a bit mental here, because I don't know what that means. But this theme is vast. But I guess it's really about the vast corpus of data about people, real people like Tim, and trying to mine it into knowledge. I mean, that's what we're really talking about here. Now, I'm sure you will have heard of omics.asterisk, as I call it, the art of adding the word omics to the end of every single word in the dictionary. Very confusing field, but very important. But linkage. Now, you may be less aware of the word linkage. This is where we get all known information, usually medical, but not always, and create a database of linked information between the same patients or people. This is a science in its own right, and it's very mature now. And we are capitalized on that to kind of bring together all of the data sets, regardless of where they're created, and make the person the focus of the data set, not the data, the focus of the world. But the world is changing. In big data, the world is growing exponentially in the amount of data and the capabilities that we've got. So really, in many ways, this is a really exciting times, because we need new methods, otherwise we're not going to be able to cope. So this has sparked a wave of innovation, really exciting innovation, and it's good to see that you're coming along for the journey. Now, AI, or artificial intelligence, it's not just the term that you put on every grant application if you want to get funded. It's a real thing. It's really here. It's here today. And it's starting to create new opportunities to do things that were previously completely impossible. As a really trivial example, we announced a bid yesterday of £6.2 million for another project. It was 170 pages of incredibly dull funding application. But we fed this into AI, and we asked it to create a song, which it did. Then we fed that song into another AI thing, and it actually sang it, both in rock, folk, and German techno style. Then we said, that's nice. Can you then create the karaoke version of it with words that go across the end, and mix it with images predominantly about myself, because I'm a bit egotistical. So that took 10 minutes. 10 minutes. That's ridiculous. Now, this is obviously just messing around, right? But 10 minutes, what power that is. And that's on something really trivial. Imagine if we took that power onto something that's much more important, because much more important about understanding people and how we can help people. You would never, ever, ever have convinced me as a slightly younger person that this is possible. And I've been the IT guy my entire life. So what's the portal doing in relation to this? The portal has revolutionized neuroimaging, I would argue, and later this year we'll see the biggest single harmonized data set in the world, which would be fantastic. But this year we're looking to do the same with Omics.asterisk. We've got lots of genomic data, but really it's about making it more accessible and more usable. We are hoping later this year to announce medical record linkage, which again will revolutionize the cohort data and breathe new life into it. But we've also known that the world is changing. So we've enabled an AI disclosure community, for instance, developing a framework for managing AI model release from trusted research environments. Importantly, we've done a lot about talking to the public about accountability and acceptability of AI models. And I think that's something which we need to do a lot more. Like our friend here just gave a real world example. They're part of the equation and we need to include them in all of the discussions. They are part of the jigsaw. They're not just the thing that we're studying. They're part of helping us to find the answer. We're creating AI-ready data sets, which has been my favorite term for a while, because what does that mean? So we've defined what that means, and we're systematically going for all the data sets to ensure that they are AI-ready. Standardization and harmonization obviously is really important, but equally, it's much more important to enrich the data with the metadata so that AI can basically start to understand the nature of the data. And again, people like Lewis and others are creating synthetic data to counteract bias in data or discrimination in AI models. So again, these are all emerging fields. They're all at the beginning of something really great. So this is why I think it's a really exciting time to be in this space. So the point is that none of this is funded by the core grants. When John put in the application, whatever it was, 100 years ago, or whenever this project started. But it is our job to basically create the best analytical environment for you lot, so you can do your very, very, very best science. And I think that's the collaboration that we have together. I may be the IT guy, but we need to work together so that I can enable you to be fantastic. So the portal, for instance, has enabled federated access for years through the partnership with ADDI. And later this year, we're pivoting. We're moving to federated AI to kind of, again, take it to that next step. And there's a big pan-UK initiative announced yesterday, the one on about a minute ago, and DPUK is a primary partner of that, and it's front of the queue to basically take the methodologies being developed by that pan-UK community so that we can bring the tools to you guys so that you can actually make a real-world difference. But that's enough from me. According to what's written down here, I'm merely the warm-up act. We have some truly, truly fantastic and super clever folk in this session, and I'm sure you're equally as excited as I am to hear what they have to say. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished speakers. Art, do you want to come on stage now? Obviously, I asked AI to summarize this because these folk, they've done so much, it's impossible. And if you read the brochure, I don't understand that either. So I did ask AI for some fun facts. I'm not going to read them out because I think AI went off on an hallucination, if I'm being really honest. Art, I didn't realize you were that exciting when I asked AI. Our keynote speaker today will be delivered by Professor Arthur W. Toga. AI is very keen that we include the W in his name at every opportunity, so that's interesting. He's a pioneer in neuroscientist, renowned for his groundbreaking work in neuroimaging and brain mapping. As a professor at the University of South California, he holds appointments across multiple disciplines. And this is where it's a challenge for someone who's got dyslexia. Ophthalmology, neurology, psychology, behavioral science, radiology, biomedical engineering, basically everything. Professor Toga directs the UCSC Mark and Mary Stevens Neuroimaging Informatics Institute, as well as the Laboratory of Neuroimaging, which houses one of the biggest collections of brain imaging repositories. His prolific contribution over 950 peer-reviewed papers and foundational texts like Brain Mapping Trilogy, etc., etc. It's fantastic, and I'm really honoured that you're here today. Now, some of that might be true, and some of that might not be true, because I didn't write that. But please, let's hear from you. Thank you very much.
Well, first thing I'd like to do is thank you, Tim. That was a very poignant introduction, and I think it's something that we always have to pay attention to. I think the comment was just made that, we do this not because it's interesting and it's difficult and fun, but because the populations that we're trying to help are us. I just ask a question before we begin. How many people here know somebody or are related to somebody that has a dementing disorder? Take a look around. The other statistic I like to use when I'm introducing a topic such as this is I ask everybody to look to the person to each side of you. Look to the person to your right, look to the person to your left. One of the three of you will get Alzheimer's disease by the time you're 85. Okay? That's a very serious statistic. And if that doesn't motivate you to do what you're doing, I don't know what will. Because it scares me, and I'm a little closer to it than you are. Because the other statistic that I think is important is one of the most important risk factors for Alzheimer's disease is simple. It's aging. So the older you get, the more likely you will get this disease. And I'm a little older than some of you. So that's what scares me. So I've been tasked to talk a little bit about the informatics-related activities associated with Alzheimer's disease and related disorders. And I gave some thought to that yesterday, in fact, about what I would tell you. And so I thought I would give you kind of an introduction about the things that have occurred in recent history and a little bit about what goes on today, both in terms of the portal and some other related activities, and how they can benefit the science. And importantly, what's about to happen, at least from my perspective. I think if you look back on your own career as you get to my age, you will begin to look at things that are about to happen, and you can appreciate what kind of transformation is on the crossroads. And I believe that sincerely. I think that was just introduced in terms of the role that AI will play in all of our work. And I'm absolutely convinced of that, and I'll show you some data that substantiates that. So most of us began in a biological field related to neuroscience in some fashion or another. And that is quite broad in and of itself. We have a variety of techniques that allow us to look at the structure of brain, everything from proteins to cells to synapses to the whole person. And I think that presents some unique challenges because each type requires a new instrumentation in order to make the measurements, and they're often unrelatable to one another. And I think one of the challenges that we face is how you can integrate across spatial domains that go from very, very small to really quite large, the whole body. And the same thing is true in function, that we can look at events that take place extraordinarily fast or events that take place over decades, and all are related to the other. And so when one is looking at a particular type of data that fits within a spatial temporal domain, a time and space, you have to understand that that's within the context of a much larger point of view that takes place either very rapidly or very slowly, very small or very large. And I think as you're building models for you to understand the pathology as it relates to comparisons with normal, you have to understand where you are in time and space. And that requires that we build models, that we build databases that allow us to begin to survey across vast ranges of time and space and individuals. Because just as I asked you all to look at your neighbor a few minutes ago, I'm sure you noticed you all look different. You have a nose and you have eyes and a mouth. So you're all human looking, but you're really quite different. And the same is true in brain. So when we're trying to make a model that represents a population, a map that represents that population, we have to have a statistical construct that allows us to accommodate the variability across us. A right-hander is different than left-handers, men versus women, 50-year-olds versus 70-year-olds, and so forth. So I believe that through these database systems, one can create a map that represents the particular cohort of interest. And only in that way can you do a comparison with a diseased version of that cohort and a healthy version and understand what the differences are, identifying druggable targets or identifying the pathophysiology that characterizes the disease, or both? I'm an imaging person by training, and imaging has come a long way. I started before MRI existed. We used to call it NMR in those days, and nuclear was the first N, and that word had to be changed because everybody thought it produced ionizing radiation, which it does not. And so the name got changed to MRI. Probably some of you knew that. But in any case, MRI itself has provided us with a witness into in vivo brain that was unprecedented until recent history. We can see vascular components. We can see spectroscopy. We can see structure. We can see function. We can see all manner of things, characterizing what's going on in brain without having to open up the skull. This has transformed how people are cared for. And I think a lot of what's done is to compare what you can see in vivo with what we can see histologically, post-mortem, to validate that the signal we're seeing in vivo truly does represent what's going on physiologically in the brain. But that's continuing to change. This slide, which was made just a few years ago, says that tau is only available histologically. That's not the case. We don't use MR, but we can use PET to see tau deposition in brain. We can see amyloid deposition in brain. So we can now see the misfolded proteins that are characteristic of a variety of dementing disorders in vivo, and understand their distribution, and understand the amount of amyloid or tau that's in brain in people that are suffering from cognitive decline or appearing relatively normal. And this trend of giving us ever more sophisticated imaging techniques continues to this day. This is real data. This is data that represents the connectography of the human brain, producing somewhere in the order of, I can't really see, 2 billion plotted points of single individual. And this is diffusion imaging, just with a variety of algorithmic approaches to give us the connectopathies, as may be the case, or the connections in the normal case of an individual. And these too can be mapped into common maps that represent whole cohorts, providing us an index as to how the brain changes as it loses neurons as a result of these disease processes. The problem, of course, is the brain's not static. It's dynamic. So it's dynamic from the day you're born to the day you die. And when you're trying to study a particular disease process that's neurodegenerative, like Alzheimer's disease, you have a window of time that's changing the brain in a trajectory that's different than the normal changes that occur in aging. And so how do we understand that? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to look at the forces that are producing this change. Maturational forces during development are altering the thickness of the cortex. So from basically birth, in this case just a year or so old, up until about 18 years of old, or actually beyond that, the brain is changing rather dramatically. But it's not in a linear way. Different parts of the brain mature at different rates compared to other parts. We need to understand that and use that when we're making comparisons about a disease process that's altering it. Other factors that are affecting brain, I'll stop that there. Other factors that are affecting brain have to do with things like stress, lifestyle changes. So we know that cortisol promotes atrophy, for example. So people that are under more stress may have more atrophy in certain parts of the brain than those that do not experience stress. And so lifestyle changes are affecting this. And once again, if we're trying to make a comparison between a normal distribution and a disease distribution, we have to understand where these people came from. As I'm sure you're all fully aware, genetics plays a significant role. There are many, many SNPs, or small mutations, that we all have, some of which contribute to risk factors associated with dementing disorders. Some do not, and probably not singly. In combination, they may produce a polygenic risk score, for example, which is one way of considering how the genetics is increasing the likelihood that we'll go on and have these diseases. And you can look at maps like this and say, well, genetics certainly controls, even in normal, characteristics of brain when one compares monozygotic to dizygotic to unrelated pairs. And once again, this is just yet another factor. We have lifestyle changes, we have behavioral changes, we have genetic changes, all which are normally occurring whether you have a dementing disorder or not. All of this speaks to the notion of creating comprehensive databases that allow us to tease out each of these factors when you're trying to do a study. And I put this slide in only knowing who I was talking to, but just kind of reminding us where we are. You know, we have to solve this problem. You know, this is a problem that doesn't affect just the patient. This is a problem that affects the family. This is a problem that affects the economic welfare of entire countries. So this is a slide that was made about 10 years ago, back in 2015 or so, that predicted by 2050, in the United States alone, the cost of caring for people with dementing disorders would exceed $1.1 trillion. This slide is woefully out of date now. That number is vastly increased. So this is a problem that most governments recognize is unsustainable. You cannot continue to go this way. We are no longer dying of heart disease or cancers at the rate we used to. So this is a truly first world problem where as the population ages, the likelihood of this disease gets ever more prominent and ever more expensive. And so we've really got to come up with strategies that allow us to deal with issues such as this. So what do? Well, we develop maps that characterize the disease, and in this way, perhaps we can better understand ways in which combining this disparate data in time and space that I mentioned when I got started. One really only has to look at a brain of a short period of time, from 1 to 4 years, of an individual that has Alzheimer's disease. There's no doubt this is a sick brain at the 4th year. The ventricles have gotten larger, the sulci have gotten larger. Any layperson can readily appreciate the changes in brain that occur in a fairly short period of time as a result of this disease process. But it's important for us to characterize the nuances of the disease as well. So we can look at just the outside, the cortex, and once again, the layperson can appreciate the dramatic change that occurs as tissue is lost in the cortex, losing some of the characteristics that we normally see in healthy brains of aged people. And then we could look at the regional differences. What brain changes are there in this group of 17 people over a period of 2 years, an average age of 68, with a moderate AD MMSE, mini mental state exam range. And you can see the hot areas are all the bad areas. Those are regions of brain that have lost more tissue than other regions of brain. So you note that it's really quite characteristic, starting out in limbic structures, the hippocampus, and then spreading out through the limbic system into other related areas. So the circuitry is particularly well suited for the disease to attack, certain circuitry, not all of it. Does it relate to what we know pathologically? Well, by making maps like this, sorry, let me just keep going here. Well, because we can make maps like this, we can then compare it with what's been seen post-mortem, looking at neurofibrillary tangles and plaques in brain in these very large studies done by Brack and Brack, and yet we see the very, very same patterns that we can see in vivo. And that's something that, I'm an imager, so I can say this, don't trust the images. Don't trust the images. It's important that we always think about this as scientists, and we understand what it can tell you and what it cannot tell you. Making colorful, pretty pictures does not necessarily make it better data. Better to appreciate, perhaps, but not necessarily better data. And so it's important that we understand the signal that we see in vivo relates to something that we know is true by looking at postmortem. And this is what that study was about. So I've kind of laid out a little bit about the variability of human brain, some of the factors that can influence it, the maturational changes, and the fact that it's a not linear process that doesn't originate at the same rate in each part of the brain. And we've also seen in dementing disorders that hippocampus and other limbic structures, temporal lobe beginnings, are the first to go in these disease process. Why is that? Why is that? This is not data. This is just a graphic that I made just to sort of ask you to think about these things. If we look at the way child development occurs, we see that the pattern originates in this fashion. And if we look at the pattern in Alzheimer's disease progression, it's the opposite. So is it true that it's last in, first out? And if that's the case, why? Well, Hippocampus is particularly well designed to be plastic, for us to learn things rapidly. It's by its nature intended to be changeable. That produces a susceptibility that seems to be relatable to what we see as a result of these disease processes. Does that tell us any more what to do? Maybe not, but it's an interesting conundrum to think about. So let me switch gears a little bit and say, okay, these are the problems. I basically outlined a set of problems that we all know about. Most of you know as much of it as anybody else. What do we do about it? And I think, the purpose of a meeting that we've had for these 2 days is really to drive home the notion we're not going to answer complicated questions unless we have the data. We must have the data in sufficient quantities, sufficiently well described, and let sufficient number of scientists and clinical scientists look at that data and think about what it's telling us, to come up with new methodology to utilize to analyze that data and produce knowledge from it, and to find ways in which we can intervene these processes that are so devastating. So I've spent the last 25, 30 years of my career doing that as sort of a sideshow, and we built data systems as well. The one that you're seeing here is called the IDA. It's part of the Laboratory of Neuroimaging, also known as LONI. And this is a slide I made a couple of weeks ago for a different talk, and we've distributed somewhere to the tune of 600 million downloads. We do this, it's a very, very large system. It's a centralized system, however. It all lives in one place. And there are some 175,000 users from 170 or so countries, and there are about 170 projects within this system. This is not a federated system. It's very large, and yet it is extremely active. There are at any moment of any time, of any day, 300 to 400 people talking to this room, moving data in and out. And it also is one of the systems that is used as the central repository for many of the multi-site trials in the United States, where data is collected on a daily basis, and that data comes to our system. We're the archivist for all of that. And so it's a very large system. One of the more famous projects which sort of began this trend of sharing openly was ADNI. ADNI's now celebrated its 20th year just recently, and we had a sort of symposium marking that milestone. And one of the things that we looked back on was I was the one that said, let's just give it all away. Who cares? We're not going to even evaluate the scientific project. We don't care. Anybody can take it to do whatever they want with it. And we said that it would all be adjudicated by the peer-reviewed journals. So papers that come out are often completely contradictory that use the very same data. Obviously, it's dependent on the methods that they use and the way they looked at the data. That's all fine. It's totally fine. That's science. If it's not replicated, maybe it was wrong in the first place. But the data is the data, and we allow anybody to have it. There's virtually no embargo whatsoever. The data is available the day it's collected and has passed QC, and which is often the very same day. So that's been a remarkable experiment, I think. In the United States, it was the very first project of that magnitude. There are some 50-odd sites, very large, very expensive study. And since then, it's been sort of the standard for which all neuroscientific programs at NIH are conducted. And now many other institutes within NIH also are doing the very same thing. It doesn't come without all kinds of problems, as you might imagine, but it's a way that kind of pokes a stick in the eye of the traditional way of doing things. But anyway, so this is a little bit about the milestone. So what's the result of doing all this sharing? Well, you get millions of downloads, you get thousands and hundreds of thousands of people using the data, and you get a lot of publications. And so what ADNI did is they said, well, you don't even have to put our names on it. We don't really care. You just have to acknowledge that it's an ADNI project. You used ADNI data. That's all you have to do. And the net result was an extraordinary amount and volume of papers that describe results important to the disease. And right now, we're somewhere around 6,500 publications in 20 years of one study, which is really a remarkable tour de force. And not mostly, I would say 90% of these papers were done without the ADNI participants having done any of it, except for the collection of the data. And so I think that the product of this has been far, far, far beyond what any of the original scientists that actually collect the data would have been able to do. And the number of biomarkers has been extraordinary. And in fact, every single clinical trial that has been conducted on Alzheimer's disease in the United States, at least, utilized ADNI data. And the 2 FDA-approved drugs, amyloid-clearing monoclonal antibodies, used ADNI data. And so it's really been a great pleasure to see that this rather simple strategy, if we're going to collect a bunch of data, we're going to identify biomarkers, and we're just going to give it out, has been so successful. And I just, to me, that was a testament to where science needs to go, that these models, of which the DPUK is one, these are things that have a very transformative effect on difficult problems that are otherwise impossible to solve. Now, as I said before, the IDA itself is a centralized facility, and it is a large facility. If you're ever in Los Angeles, send me an email. You can come and see it. It's a great deal of fun to see. It looks very futuristic, very Hollywood, So we have Hollywood. Anyway, it utilizes some 26 petabytes of data that are online, so it's quite large. It has over 7,000 processors associated with it, so people execute on it as well. The data is backed up into the cloud, but that's not where the data lives. It's only backed up there because the transaction costs in the cloud were too expensive for us. Couldn't afford it. So we do it locally. And we add somewhere to the tune of just under 50 million files per month presently. And that's not just the Alzheimer's related studies. It's all neurodegenerative diseases, quite a bit in PD, quite a bit in MS as well. And the other thing, just sort of as an anecdote here is, and this is the last slide I have on technology, because I know there's an IT guy in the audience, but is that the machinery that makes all this work, it changes quickly and it's expensive. So back in 2018, we were storing all this stuff on these 12 terabyte drives, and there were racks and racks and racks of these things just to keep it all going. We don't do that anymore. It's all solid state. There's no mechanical devices anymore. It's all completely solid state, and it's now about just under 62 terabytes per drive, and the things are smaller than the width of your hand. And same platform that it was, and it's orders of magnitude almost bigger than it used to be. And that's the trend. It's the trend not only in storage, it's the trend in computation. And that's because the algorithms that run on these things are ever more compute intensive, which is important, and they run ever faster. And so you have to have more data available faster because they just go through it really fast. So big data is really the key to success. But big data comes with big responsibilities. If you get big enough data, you can find anything. You can find anything as nonsensical as you want because you have enough data and you can prove it. So we have a couple of problems, of course. We have the nomenclature problems. People collect data, they use different terms. All that has to get satisfied with harmonization strategies, and that's obviously a big issue, and lots of work is done in that way, both automated, semi-automated, and manual. There are reluctant collaborators, but nevertheless, big data is upon us. We have it. You have it. It's everywhere now. But what do you do with it? So the graphic, which you can't read by design, the horizontal and the vertical axes, show us a very good correlation coefficient of over 0.99. So you don't get much better than that. And it's a correlation between, there are states in the United States. We have 50 states presently. We're trying to get 2 more, but we probably won't get them. But the states in the United States, one of which is Maine, which is in the northeast corner of the United States, and it doesn't have a great population, and then the rest of the country. And this is a correlation between the divorce rate of those people that live in the state of Maine and the national consumption of margarine. There you have it, 99% correlation coefficient. So there's a direct correlation. The more people that get divorced in Maine, the more margarine we eat. Okay? So if that doesn't make you sort of say, statistics can find anything, I don't know what will. And it can. If you have enough data, you can find anything. So one of the lessons you'll take home here is make sure you do all your permutation corrections, make sure that you think about the statistics in a very careful, conservative way, or you may end up with a correlation like that, and everybody will chuckle at you too. Okay, so here's a portal that we built using the federated model that you've already heard about. We built this in 2014, and it's continued to evolve. It's called GAIN, and it's a project where we said, look, in all honesty here, the project that we have in the IDA where we keep all that data centrally, that doesn't scale well. You're not going to be able to control the whole world that way. you have to let people do what they want to do and just talk to them. The way Google does it. You ask for a search in Google, you don't know where that machine is. It's all over the place. And the notion of having this network, this mesh, if you will, where the data can live where it lives and all you got to need to know is where it is, that's a lot more efficient. That allows you to sort of take advantage of parallel search, parallel this, parallel that, in a way that scales indefinitely, frankly. And so this was a project that we built that did exactly that. The archives that live around the world, you see that, and these things are then linked together through the portal, which is called GAIN. And the notion there was to facilitate secondary and meta-analysis rather than us collecting these data, which is really expensive. You just let it get collected as it will, and you describe it as comprehensively as you can. You try to make methods that do the normalization of variables as best you can, and you collect ever more data so that you have that big data collection through this portal. Even though it doesn't live in a centralized place, that doesn't matter, as long as you can find it through a centralized portal. And then it talks to all these sites that you see listed with these graphics that are their logos. And right now, there's somewhere over 700,000 participants or subjects in there, about 70 data partners, and that changes all the time because one of the ways that we were able to convince people to participate in this, we said, there's no rules here. You want to switch it off tomorrow because you're mad? Switch it off. So they have control. So these things come and go all the time. They switch it off either to update it, they switch it off because they're upgrading their equipment, they switch it off because it's Friday night and they're going to the pub, whatever, they switch it off. And so this number will change. It's really quite dynamic, but it does give you the ability to search across a whole variety of attributes which are organized in a logical way across these 700,000 people or so. And from there, you can do these types of meta-analysis. You can look on a search and you can say, what's the question that I want to ask? Then choose the data partners that allow us to have the variables that will allow us to answer that question. We map the pooled variables. These graphics come out of GAIN if you play with it. It's all open, by the way, so have at it. There's no real account needed at all. If you do the interrogation, you do have to fill out an account, but it's granted automatically. Nobody's actually looking at it. It's just for us to know that it's not a bot or some sort of spam thing. That's all it does. And then you define the cohort yourself, set up the analysis, all of which is contained within GAIN. It's limited at this point because it actually runs on our system. And then you can agree to the terms of use and you get results. And what you're looking at right here is MMSE relative to CDR by age and by sex, I think. I can't remember. So you just get the statistical results right away. So you're actually analyzing on the database. You don't get the data unless you then go to the sites themselves. So you can click on the little logo and they give you the permission. We don't, because we don't own the data. It's not ours. So that's a way, it's very similar to how some of DPUK works. And I think these are the things that are a way for the future. And eventually these sites are just going to let you have it, because as ADNI has shown, that's mutually beneficial. And this is just another example of that, where you can look at the distribution of subjects that fit your criteria for the three data sets, as you see over there, the three logos in the upper left-hand corner. So that's a way that you can use the system to get at big data without it all being centralized, in a way where you can answer some very interesting questions. Now, we did the very same thing with Parkinson's disease. We manage all the data that the Michael J. Fox Foundation collects. That's a global effort to collect prodromal data on PD patients, as well as PD patients earlier in the phases of their disease. And then as they get, these are all longitudinal studies. And there's a whole battery of data that's collected. And the very same methodology is applied here, where you can poke around on this data. Since it's a single project, the data is much more readily available. It's determined by these guys. And these little circles that you see here, you move them around and but because you're working graphically, you're actually moving the cohorts of data. You get these plots and so forth. And I think these are the ways of the future as well. We don't always do the statistical analysis, very complicated writing out equations anymore. You do it graphically. It's just easier. So you get people that have good ideas but may not be facile with programming, and you do it that way. The other point that I want to make before I start to close here is I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that data changes all the time. It's getting collected all the time. So these data systems that you're using are adding new data. Either they're being collected and just coming up on a daily basis, or a new tranche of data comes as that project is being completed, or a new project gets added to the collection of projects. So it changes. So the results you got 3 weeks ago may in fact be different than the results you get 3 weeks from now, because it's different data. And so one of the things that we have to think about is that's a snapshot in time. That as data gets bigger and bigger, of course, the change over time will get smaller, but we still need to recognize data changes over time. This is just a graphic that shows in our system what happens as data changes over time. So that's actually executed in the system to try to manage all that. So let me begin to wind down by making some predictions of the future. What technologies have transformed the human condition? Anybody? You can obviously see what I said on this slide here. You may not agree with it, but I said the internet and the cell phone, or the mobile phone as you call it here, have been the most transformative technologies that have hit humans since time began. But the rate of change in how we communicate, not only with data, but information and with each other, has been completely made upside down as a result of these two technologies. That the internet is on the phone, and there isn't anybody in this room that doesn't have a phone. There's hardly anybody in the world that doesn't have a phone anymore. And I've just been amazed at how rapidly that occurred. And what's next? It's AI. And it's on us. It isn't about to come. It is here. And I believe very strongly that the influence of AI on the human condition, everything about it, will be more rapid and more extensive and more comprehensive than either the cell phone or the internet. It's everywhere, and it is growing exponentially. So if you look at this graph, you can see all the technologies that have influenced the human condition. And where the inflection point is, where it says now, is AI. And that space above it, our lifetime, it's filled with AI. And it's the inflection point. It's the biggest change that we're going to see ever, if we survive AI, by the way. So media, somebody said we need to talk more about this. Media does not take as sanguine a view of AI as we might at all. All you got to do is look at the movies. I live near Hollywood, so we make movies there. These two movies are important. I don't know, has anybody not seen 2001: A Space Odyssey? It was an old movie, but you haven't seen it? Everybody's seen it. Okay. It's a great movie. So in the movie, the protagonist is the only one that's left. That the AI-run computer called HAL, which is the first three initials before IBM, by the way, HAL. Think about that. That HAL decides that the crew is unnecessary for him, Hal, to complete the mission. So he kills them all. He kills them all, except for one who makes it through the end. So the thing of the movie is AI computers will decide humans are unnecessary, and they kind of get in the way. They need to be terminated. And the slide on the right is our favorite cyborg assassin, the Terminator, who I've met personally, by the way. He's only about this tall, which is kind of disappointing, really. But anyway, he's a character. He lives not so far from where I live. But he had this great character whose entire job was to kill off humans. Not only kill off the humans, but kill off the mother of the most important human of the future. So Hollywood has taken the position AI is really the way, it is really not that great, because the machines that get created and are fueled by AI make the decision that humans are unnecessary and need to be eliminated. They just get in the way. So the point I'm trying to make here, I don't know what the point is, but they're funny. And I just think that AI will have a dramatic impact on the human condition, no question about it. And I think one of the things that just happened about a year or so ago was generative AI. So ChatGPT is something that all of us think about as generative AI. That's no longer the only one, of course, but now there's DeepSeek. If you haven't used DeepSeek, which comes from China, it's better than all of these things. It's really, really good. That's just, it's changing almost on a monthly basis. So let me just sort of go through a couple of the AI things here. So ChatGPT was one of the most amazing things. You could ask it what the pedigree was of your speaker, and it would produce a bunch of text. We now use AI to find what students write in their theses, because most of it's AI generated, so we have to use an AI algorithm to find out which is AI, which it does, and the students flunk, but okay. So ChatGPT creates text. There are many things that can go from text to images. You write a text, it'll produce a movie for you. And one of them is called Sora. And so take a look at this little movie on the bottom. This is an older woman celebrating her birthday. It's AI. Now, it could just be that the AI took a movie and sort of superimposed the background. I actually don't know the answer to that. I know the answers to the future ones. So I have some questions for you. These are some future examples. I want you to look at these and tell me which ones are AI. I'll ask you that at the end. So there's a few of them. Here we go. Chrome sushi doesn't fly. That one's pretty obvious, right? Chrome sushi does not fly. Probably AI generated. That'd be the obvious guess, right? What about this one? Rolling sea on the left, rolling clouds on the right. What about this one? Old guy wearing a hat, blinking, young woman writing something at a desk. And what about this one? A cell with some glia, complicated, must be zoomed in really small. How would you get something like that? Which ones are AI? Which ones are not? You can just shout it out, it's fine.
All of them.
What was it?
All.
All are AI? Nope. The last one? Not AI. Not all the rest are AI. That guy in the hat, the woman writing at the desk, it's AI. Can you believe anything anymore? It's all AI. So this one, I built. It comes out of a single cubic millimeter from a data set that was shared openly on the internet by a guy named Jeff Lichtman at Harvard, wrote this paper last year. And it's EM data. And we made this model out of that data with 105 million polygons. Took a long time to compute it. But it's real data. Came off of EM. So, interesting. AI and neuroimaging. It has allowed us to enhance diagnostic tools in radiology. You can simulate brain activity, and you can explore large data sets for pattern recognition. Really important. And in neuroimage analysis, the FDA, which is our regulatory body for new drugs and techniques in medicine, has now approved 2 drugs for the identification and measurement of amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, or ARIA. And people that take lecanemab in particular, when you take that drug, the FDA recommends that people are given MRIs after the initiation of the drug for a period of time to screen those people for these negative secondary effects that can occur. And we now can do this using AI. So the intrusion of AI in the care and treatment of patient populations is upon us in the United States, for sure. I know lecanemab isn't approved in the EU, I don't think. But you know, as drugs emerge and you need techniques to do this fairly quickly, AI will certainly play a significant role, ever-increasing role, probably. Deep learning in Alzheimer's disease, lots of people do this now. It is very, very common and actually quite good. And it allows us not to just look at imaging, because imaging by itself can tell us something in some cases, but linking this to genetics, linking this to behavior, linking this to biosamples that we get, fluid and tissue, and the batteries that we get for cognitive measurements, all of these things can be linked together to produce a prediction algorithm, which has extraordinary utility, because there's no question that a disease such as Alzheimer's disease can be better addressed as early as possible. And so you want to find these people as quickly as possible. Okay, I'm just about done here. I have one little quick movie that shows what we do with AI.
Understand a significant amount of information from the light that makes up someone's face. We can present these networks with a variety of other inputs like genetics, MRI scans, and blood data. The artificial neural network can then mathematically process various aspects of this data through many connections across network layers, building a deep representational understanding of information. When we pair this process with massive data sets that have been collected over many years through projects like the Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative and the DABI Brain Archive, we can mathematically train these networks with nonlinear supervised learning, teaching them how to properly identify important clinical factors. We can then computationally and analytically use AI to look for patterns in these types of input, to find things no human could detect, like the person's risk for developing Alzheimer's disease, or what specific treatments would be more likely to work than others.
So we employ this on a routine basis now, and I think it's one of the things that has really made possible for us to utilize these big data collections in a much more effective way. Final slide is large language models. So large language models allow us to ask the system to learn how to interact with very complex search engines that are coupled to these data systems. They're complicated. They run on SQL. Certainly there are graphical approaches, as I showed you. It's still hard. You know, we're trying to make it so that we can communicate the way we do in real life. And in real life, I tell my student, go find the correlation between this, this, and the other thing, you know, divide by this group and then do X, Y, Z. And I do it in a verbal way. Large language models allow us to do the very same thing by connecting these to the data systems. So we built this approach here. Let me see if I can turn it on. We built this approach, which I don't know if you can see that, but get me the list of 3T imaging events from 2022 and include patient IDs as well as race and ethnicity. That's the kind of thing you would just say to somebody, go get that stuff. Well, so you just type that in, and the large language model knows how to translate that into a series of SQL commands, such as shown right here, and then the data appears. So it's an amazing phenomenon. Now we have to type this in now. Within a month or two, we'll be talking just into the microphone, and the thing will just translate and execute. And so these are the kinds of things that are coupled to GAIN now. It's not available, it's in a beta version, but will be. And these things are extraordinarily helpful to democratize access to these very important data sets. And I think the future is exciting. I think the future is going to reward us with all the hard effort that everybody around the world has put into this. And I look forward to great things to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk. It kind of made me think about one of my favorite books, which is Max Tegmark, Life 3.0. I'm an ECR, and my question is about the use of these large language models by PhD students and people who are ECRs these days, but also the next generation of PhD students who will have been raised during the era of AI. Do you think it's useful to learn coding these days? Do you think it's going to become a thing that we don't need anymore? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a good question. If I was a programmer, I'd be a bit nervous, honestly. We can ask an AI algorithm to code things up. It doesn't always get it perfect. In fact, it never gets it perfect so far, but it will. So I think that's actually going to be the case for many things. The one thing I gave a talk about 2 weeks ago about the difference between AI and HI. AI being artificial and H being human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. And I concluded after spending a few weeks putting that talk together that AI really has some deficits in terms of creativity. It doesn't generally create much at all, if anything. It cuts apart things that already exist. So those of us that have a creative outlet, and science is a creative endeavor, I don't think we have anything to worry about. But that the mechanical things that we spend time doing that can be done by machine, my guess is those things will be done by machine. But it's a guess, just so you know. I don't have a crystal ball, or I'd be richer than I am.
Thanks, that's a fantastic talk and overview. I just want to ask about the sort of governance of these things. When you put these into a sort of clinical population, it makes a mistake. Who's at fault, and where does the governance lie with that? Whose responsibility is it?
The clinician makes the final decision. The clinician has to make the final decision, because in the U.S. people say they practice medicine. Well, that's because there's an art form to medicine. It isn't if this then else. It isn't only that. It's paying attention to the patient condition, understanding the human being that's facing you, and putting that together in the context of that person, what they're going through. And so I think the clinician always must be the decider. This is just a tool, just like any other tool, an ophthalmoscope, a heart monitoring device. It's just a tool. And it will give some information that the clinician can include in their evaluation and recommendation for that patient. But right now, and I cannot see that changing, frankly. I would not want to be a patient treated by a machine either, myself. But anyway. Yep.
Thank you very much to John for inviting me. It's great to be here and give me the opportunity really just to sort of tell you a bit. I'm going to change tack now from this wonderful, visionary, AI-generated future a bit more to the gritty reality of the coalface in terms of clinician neuroscientist research that we do. I'm going to just briefly touch on my disclosures. Particularly relevant is the fact that I'm part of an advisory board that's helped with an Oxford University-based spin-out company called New Health, and I'll talk briefly about that. So I was asked to talk on digital measures of Parkinson's, and Tim, I liked your comment that dementia is sort of 30 years behind cancer. I mean, in some ways, Parkinson's and digital tech and preventing dementia in Parkinson's sometimes feels to me like it's in the Bronze Age. But anyway, relative to dementia. So we're moving forward slowly. But I would say I've been involved in this for over a decade, and there was a lot of suspicion about using digital tech and what it might contribute to our current sort of clinical rating scale. So I'm going to address this question. I'm going to ask and think about the key challenges and questions that we are facing with this tech. It's really important to think a bit about the participant user experience. So that's more than just compliance and tolerability. And it's also important to think not just about the patient, but about the clinician's experience of using it. I'm going to talk a bit about our own research. So there is a bewildering array of digital tech currently, but I'm going to focus on what I can talk about and what I know, which is work that we've been doing using a smartphone, both to stratify Parkinson patients at baseline and also to predict the underlying biological processes happening in Parkinson's, and by that, underlying neurotransmitter levels of dopamine. Patient-related outcome measures, or PROMs, are becoming increasingly relevant for any condition and for licensing and approvals. And I'm going to show how we've been able to predict these in advance using the smartphone. And then I'm going to talk a bit about passive digital approaches with GATE in a prodromal group who are at risk for future dementia with Lewy body, future Parkinson's, so an alpha-synucleinopathy prodromal cohort. And maybe think a little bit about the future for digitals in this space. So why include digital measures at all in Parkinson's was something that I was often asked when we started to capture. I think it gives us the opportunity to capture real-world data. And we've all seen patients who come into clinic and the partner tells you about the gate freezing that happens every time they stand up and go to the kitchen, and you get them out and you say, right, let's have a look at your freezing. And they just walk down this 20-meter corridor and back. They've got a really straight posture. They're doing their absolute best. It's not representative of what's happening 24/7. This approach allows us to detect fluctuations over time, even in the order of magnitude or over days, weeks, and months. And it is an opportunity, I would argue, to collect data with greater nuance or granularity than clinical scales, where the patient's performance is going to be absolutely driven by their sleep, the night before, how the journey has been, the parking to come to see you. And there's a large variation in these clinical rating scales. Parkinson's in clinical trials, we're dealing with a very strong placebo effect. And I think that digital measures have an opportunity to mitigate against this. And we are setting about trying to prove this. So far, as I'm aware, this has really only been looked at in Huntington's disease with Ralph Rahman, who actually looked at the same patient group in a randomized placebo-controlled trial of chorea. And the clinician rating scale had a strong placebo effect, as you can see here on the top line, over time. But the digital motor measure of hand grip showed absolutely no placebo effect. And it's very interesting. It may also be who actually applied the tech. Was it done by the doctor or by a research assistant? We have significant inter and intra-rater variability using our gold standard of the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, or UPDRS. And in this study, the same patients were assessed by clinicians of varying seniority. And the most senior down-rated consistently the scores, and the most junior up-regulated the scores. And if you looked at the difference, this was equivalent to four-fold, 4 times 3 annualized motor UPDRS points a year. So 12-point difference just between the raters at the same time, which is a clinical trial endpoint. So, significant variability. And anyone who tries to sort of deny this as a factor is sort of living in a delusional world. So that's sort of some of the kind of potential advantages of Parkinson's digital measures, but what are the challenges? I think the first is skepticism that this technology is really going to do anything or improve anything. The maturity of the measure, developing regulatory approval is a minimum of a decade, gathering the scientific evidence. Can it be deployed at scale? Well, everybody has a smartphone, even in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. So it depends on the tech. What about the kind of deployment infrastructure, data infrastructure, the participant experience I've already talked about, and it is a significant investment. And many pharma companies would say, well, why do we need to do this when you've already got your gold standard, which is your UPDRS rating scale? So key questions if you're evaluating any digital tech. Firstly, how reliable is it? What's the test-retest? Are there any learning effects? And I haven't got time to talk about that, but I'm very happy to elaborate on the work we've done showing this. Can you use the digital technology, firstly, to distinguish or separate or diagnose people with Parkinson's from age and gender match controls who have co-pathologies of normal aging like arthritis? Can you use it to measure progression in prodromal and manifest Parkinson's? And can you use it to predict progression as well, which would be incredibly useful for patients at baseline in a clinical trial? Can it show biological relevance? Can it improve your understanding of the underlying pathological processes? For Parkinson's, it's really a really nice thing would be if it could measure levodopa benefit, because that is a key prognostic indicator, but it's also what the clinician will use when they're deciding about more complex therapies like deep brain stimulation, apomorphine pump, duodopa. And most importantly, really, how does the patient find using this tech? Are they going to be persuaded it's worth it? So I'm going to start with some work we've done on the user experience. And for this talk, I'm really focusing on the smartphone and digital measures we've used for motor function. We have a lot of other emerging data on cognitive function, but I had to focus on the time permitting. So first thing is that there are 2 broad sort of classifications of digital tech. The first is active, the second is passive testing. So the way you can think about it is that an active digital task is something where you're actually asking that patient to do a series of tests at a prescribed time in a certain way. So what I'm showing here is the APDM on the left, gait sensor task there. And here I'm showing some motor tasks from our smartphone. And this is very different from passive testing, which typically will collect data over a longer period of time, weeks to months. So this is an activity device, very small. It can be put onto a wristwatch. It can be put into shoes. It can be put on a lumbar on the lower back as a lumbar sensor. And then there are other in-home monitoring systems which can record spontaneous activity within the home, but are also being tested. So participant user experience has to also think a bit about a clinical trial scenario. And we were lucky enough to get funded by Cure Parkinson's Trust, which is a small charity focusing on very innovative developments in Parkinson's, to do a digital add-on project for people with Parkinson's doing the exenatide PD3 trial. So just to introduce you to this, this is one of the largest interventional trials that we've had in the UK to date. And it's also one of the longest. So it ran over 2 years. 200 patients with moderate Parkinson's were randomized to either active treatment, which was an injection of a GLP-1 agonist on a weekly basis, versus the dummy injection. And we were testing at 6 monthly intervals here throughout the 2 years. We were doing digital testing using a smartphone, the active task in clinic and at home, where we've given the participant one to take home, although they could also download it onto their own phone. And we were also testing over 7 days passive home gait using activity. And we were then comparing the outcomes that we were collecting with the parallel UPDRS. And these were being collected in off state, where the patient is withdrawing from medication the night before, coming in off med, being tested with UPDRS, the smartphone and the gait. And we had a survey. So this is the questions. It's very simple. There was one for the smartphone and in parallel, one for the activity device, which was being led by Lynn Rochester out of Newcastle Uni. So firstly, the results of how the patients found using the two technologies. So these are, we had overall 394 patients recruited, and the three largest recruiting sites was UCL, followed by Oxford and Plymouth. And these three sites also recruited 91 patients across as a total to the smartphone and gait. We had reasonably good completion of the survey at baseline, so 84 out of the 91 patients, and all of about 92% of participants, both at the baseline and follow-up, said they found, the follow-up was done at the end of the study at 2 years, they found this smartphone app easy to use. It takes 7 minutes to do. 89% were happy to use it in future at home, and 96% would be happy using it in in-clinic visits. For the activity, similar but slightly lower, around 71 to 75% of people finding it easy to use and willing to use it at home. So the activity device it stays on, people are out to shower, but we do advise not to swim, although we have had one patient who went surfing, another patient who dropped their device down the loo. In terms of compliance, we were asking patients to try and complete 3 tests, broadly speaking, around morning, lunchtime and evening, over 7 days. And that was being asked of them every 6 months. And they were being provided with a smartphone with the app already installed. And so what we found was that 25% met or exceeded this, producing a total of 105 recordings. And one patient was really very diligent and was achieving something ridiculous like 80 over a week. 51% could manage 2 to 3 recordings, 10% 1 to 2. So over about 85% were at least managing 1 recording per day, which was our minimum for the analysis. 14% did less. Now, for the user experience, we actually have also gone a little bit further and developed some focus groups through New Health. And New Health has done a lot of work with patient focus groups. So here, I'm really just sort of showing you some reports of patients using the app at home. And Jim Sheridan's very happy for me to share this. And what he said is that he found it easy to install and using it on his own phone. He found it relatively easy to do. Based on feedback from patients, the app now also can prompt you to take your medication. And then there's various other quotes, something that we've been waiting for years. and finding it quite easy to use. I think all of this background focus work's important. So what could the app potentially do? Well, we were actually collecting this data to see if the app might provide exploratory outcome evidence that exenatide was effective versus placebo. And Timothy Auberge is our postdoctoral digital scientist who's done all of this work. But as you will all know, very surprisingly, this phase 3 trial was negative. There was absolutely no difference between UPDRS-3, which was the primary outcome, in placebo exenatide. And this was quite a shock. And what we were doing now is using this app. I don't know if you can run the video by clicking on the mouse at the back, just to show you a breakdown of these tasks. So the patient or participants asked to go R into the smartphone. They're then asked to put the smartphone in their pocket and stand. They then, after 30 seconds, they hear a beep or have a vibration in the smartphone, which is in their pocket. They then walk, and they're asked to walk around 10 meters, turn and come back. And you'll see now our helpful volunteer with Parkinson's walking you through some of these tests. There is also, we changed the app because as a clinician, we weren't capturing differences between the sides. So, you know, Parkinson's is a very asymmetric condition. Typically starts in one arm and it remains worse in that affected arm throughout the duration. We also measure rest and postural tremor and reaction time. So despite the negative data, we were interested to know if you took the 1,000 baseline smartphone features that we extract from this 8-minute task, whether you could actually predict at trial entry over the next 2 years if that individual patient was going to be a fast or a slow motor progressor. So we had various data-driven and also a priori approaches. And what I'm showing here is that in the 103 PD patients, there is a significant dichotomy at baseline and over the next 2 years between the fast and slow motor progressors in the real-time exenatide trial. And what we were able to show is that the smartphone could predict that with around overall accuracies of around 80%. And the 80% is off medications, I got it slightly wrong. And the 74% overall accuracy for fast versus slow was on medication. And that was using smartphone with clinical features. But if you simply use the UPDRS scores alone, the accuracy is reduced. So here what I'm showing you is that if you add on the smartphone features to the UPDRS, you improve the accuracy of overall prediction. And an 80% accuracy is suddenly very relevant because a lot of clinical trials do not account for the fact that each person with Parkinson's is very different. And the heterogeneity, if you have a bias in how you select your fast versus slow progressors, can lead to a false negative or positive trial result. So that was a really key finding. This is work in submission for publication currently. And we looked very hard and we failed to find any difference between placebo and exenatide treated groups with all of the smartphone features, combined measures and sum scores. So we were very consistent, which is reassuring, with the primary outcome. So now I'm going to move on to think a bit about how we have conceptualized that the smartphone might be able to give a biological or predict a biological signal in Parkinson's. And Parkinson's is a dopamine neurotransmitter deficiency, as well as multiple other neurotransmitters, but dopamine is the one that is most strongly linked to movement. So I thought, well, we've got, some of these patients have done DAT scans, as you can see here. And, the top, just for those, the top here, you see that the bright signal that should be going all the way back to this sort of teardrop is reduced. And that's showing a very sort of typical reduction. And here in this patient, it's even more pronounced and it's asymmetric. So the left reduction corresponds with the right side being slower, more tremulous and more rigid in general. So we looked at all of the studies we've done where patients have consented and had a smartphone test in clinic and at home or at home. And we found that we had 100 DAT scans, and these were qualitatively analysed by our very experienced neuroradiologists as being normal or abnormal. And you can see here that the 100 come from 56 patients with prodromal Parkinson's, PSG diagnosed RBD, rapid eye movement sleep behavior disorder, 39 PD who all had abnormal scans, 5 controls, age and gender matched, who all had normal scans, and of the RBD, around only 30% have an abnormal DAT scan with reduced striatal dopamine. We then matched the DAT to the smartphone assessment within a year, and we looked to see whether we could predict the striatal binding ratios using the smartphone features. And this work has been done by Katharina Günther as part of her PhD here in Oxford. She used MLA approaches, shown here, with our benchmark model of using the MDS-UPDRS Part 3. And she's been able to show that the optimal smartphone classifier into normal versus abnormal is around 82%. And you slightly improve that overall accuracy by adding in the MDS-UPDRS3. So here for the first time, we have an 8-minute test that could be done remotely at home, could be done in clinic, and that can actually predict if an individual is likely to have a normal or an abnormal DAT scan without needing to go to hospital, have an expensive radiation scan. So this has great utility for future in terms of population screening approaches, both for people with undiagnosed or latent Parkinson's, and also for stratifying prodromal patients, many of whom are now having DAT scans, for example, as part of the PPMI protocol. And I think this is the first example where a smartphone or any digital tool has provided direct evidence of biological signal through the striatal dopamine. So moving on to patient-related outcome measures, Christine Lowe, who's now a neurology consultant in Sheffield and still working in this area with us, was able to take patients with Parkinson's coming to clinic, do this single smartphone test, and then look to see if she could train models that predicted if that patient was going to go from not falling to falling, or not having gait freezing to freezing, or having cognitive impairment. And the other main one was, how well did they need any help doing their hobbies? So their measure of functionality. And she was able to predict in what was really a very small data set, numbers of around 30 to 50 patients at the time, with pretty good accuracies again, the onset 18 months before this has happened. So again, as a clinician, you may be able to identify patients at future risk of falls. You would then be referring them for an OT home visit. Physio maybe looking at their gait, look at their bone health, think about how you're going to improve that. And ideally, in the longer term, you're going to be reducing the burden for NHS, for hospital admissions, falls and related fractures. The very common reason that Parkinson patients get admitted to hospital. Coming to the end now, this is a study where we looked for very early gait changes in our prodromal group with PSG diagnosed RBD. We now have 308 of these patients that are being longitudinally followed up every year as part of the Oxford Parkinson's Discovery Cohort. In this study, we had 63 who had the lumbar sensor attached for 7 days for the home gait monitoring, compared to 35 age and gender matched controls. And this analysis was done by Sylvia up in Newcastle, supervised by Lynn Rochester. So there were no major macro gait characteristic differences between the two groups, but you could distinguish the RBD prodromal group from micro gait differences, in particular things like reduced step velocity variability, and rhythm that were worse in RBD compared to controls. Accuracy is here around 62%. So just to conclude, where are we going with digitals in the Parkinson's space? So hopefully I've been able to show you and persuade you that they have utility. We've been able to show that this smartphone test, a single smartphone test, either at home or in clinic, can actually separate on a group level people with Parkinson's from controls and those with prodromal Parkinson's RBD from the control group. Christine Lowe's work has shown that we can predict PROMs 18 months before they occur. We're now looking at validating that in the much larger data set we've had with longitudinal follow-up as more patients develop these milestones. We've been able to use a baseline smartphone test in the exenatide phase 3 trial to predict if an individual is going to go on in the next 2 years to be a fast or a slow motor progressor. And Katerina has also been able to show that we can use a single smartphone test to predict with an accuracy of around 80% if you have a normal or abnormal striatal dopamine level. In general, I would say that these approaches are well tolerated by patients. 96% of participants in the exenatide phase 3 trial were very happy to use this. Obviously, that's quite a different representative patient group from all people living with Parkinson's in the community, because people who volunteer to do a trial are much more motivated and, in general, a bit more tech savvy. We're achieving good compliance, with 96% of patients achieving at least 1 to 2 recordings a day. And our passive gait is a complementary approach which can distinguish these very early prodromal gait characteristic changes. So I think we've shown potential. The question is, couldn't these be applied for robust and scalable population screening? So there is a study using just the voice element in the US, which Max Little published on, which showed that just by people ringing a telephone number advertised on a radio and leaving an voice recording, you could get numbers in the tens of thousands. I think we need to further work to validate this, but I think there's great utility for these approaches. And I just want to end by thanking my group, who are very dedicated and have stuck by me. Thank you.
Thanks, that's a brilliant talk. Obviously the usability and the compliance are really, really important. But did you get any feel for whether cognitive impairment, for instance, was a particular barrier to be able to use these devices, or do you feel that some people are overestimating that problem?
So we've been doing these tests in clinic. What we find, we do it on everyone in our cohort, of which we do have people with dementia and MCI. We've also been able to train, the app's available in 15 languages around the world. So we've had to sort of deliver the training remotely via Teams. And then it's being done in, for example, in Seoul, South Korea, China and Europe, as well as US. So I think that even a patient with cognitive impairment actually can be taken through the 7 tasks and you can still get reliable data. I've been testing this in my atypical Parkinson clinic. The main limitation there is, sadly, many of them can't actually stand or even walk very well. So there you're having to really just focus on what you can gather. But I think that it's going to be very predictive of, in an earlier stage of saying you've got Parkinson's or not. And this is something that we're now doing with James Rowe, Hugh Morris as part of the MRC Express study. But I think that even patients with dementia can do this. And what New Health have done is they have actually a video of the person doing the test, which then, which the person can follow. They have written instructions that can also be spoken. So I think it's also available for, visually impaired, etc.
Thanks.
Thank you, and thanks a lot to John for the invitation. I also want to take the opportunity to this presentation to thank more generally DPUK. I'm probably the rare French person to have my data on DPUK. Am I the only one? I should be the only one. Yeah. I want to be the only one. And it's been really amazing. It's been really changing our ability to share data. And we don't have the same in France. And I'm really glad this happened. And I also want to thank the DPUK team, it's really amazing to work with them. And I also want to thank Niall for organizing my travel and everything. Thanks a lot. Okay, so usually we have the EP talk at the beginning because we don't miss much. That's what people think when they do a program, but thanks also to have the AP talk at the end. So I want to go back to some basic thing and to show you what the data say compared to what we are able to change in dementia research. So the AD blood biomarkers have changed quite tremendously the landscape of AD research these last years. So during more than 25 years, we were using diagnostic criteria for dementia based only on clinic, and there were no other factor taken into account. So we had mild Alzheimer's disease, moderate Alzheimer's disease, severe, and based on clinical diagnosis and the impact of the impairment on social life. Things have changed in 2011, where some pre-dementia, pre-Alzheimer groups have been defined. And after that, in 2018, there was a big shift in the definition of Alzheimer's disease and towards a biological definition. It was published first April 1st, but it stayed after. And this biological definition of Alzheimer's disease was revised recently, and I will present the last version. On the other side, there's a French revolution, as usual, that's led by Bruno Dubois, and there's this alternative classification of dementia and Alzheimer's disease called the International Working Group Criteria, which also has a free version. So what's the last version of the criteria for diagnosing and staging Alzheimer's disease? I'm not sure you can see clearly, but the idea is to use the newer biomarkers to stage dementia, Alzheimer's disease, at asymptomatic level. So the idea of these new criteria is to have COB1 biomarkers that can help to diagnose disease at stage where there's no clinical changes. And there are CO2 biomarkers that can be used more to assess progression and change over the time. And then there's a staging from 2 to 6 that stages, it's really about the severity, and the stage 6 corresponds, 4 to 6 correspond more to what we knew until 2011. So we can wonder whether these changes in definition these last 15 years are technology versus evidence-based. To my knowledge, there's no real validation of these criteria, but this is not something that's specific to Alzheimer's area. I mean, in most disease, there are some change in definition, like if we take hypertension, and there's no real validation. It's more experts that decide to change some definitions. And what's common to the last definition of Alzheimer's disease is that they were set up in first instance to be research criteria, but in fact, there's no protocol to decide that they can move from research to clinic. And in the truth is that very quickly, without any more evidence, the research criteria move in clinic, and that's a bit of a problem. So what I wanted to show you today is what real-life data tell us about the validity of this biomarker. And for that, to illustrate that, I'm going to present some results of our cohort. So I'm going to do self-promotion of our work, but I think it's a nice way to illustrate where we are and what needs to be done in order to validate further this biomarker. So the material is the Memento cohort. It's a French national prospective cohort in persons with either cognitive impairment or isolated cognitive complaint. They've been, I will show the map, but they've been recruited all over France in some memory clinics that are in big cities because they have access to MRI and biobank facilities. Participants have been followed up at least during 5 years. And to start, they were not demented, and they agreed to have a brain MRI and blood sampling that were therefore mandatory. So that shows France, in case you don't know where the map of France. So the study, the protocol consisted in at least yearly visits. So for some patients, we've seen them every 6 months. And the yearly visit consists in a clinical assessment and social and human sciences questionnaires. Whereas at baseline and every 2 years, we had more biomarkers that were measured through cerebral MRI, PET imaging, so FDG PET, and blood sampling and lumbar puncture. So the FDG PET, lumbar puncture, and amyloid PET were optional. And in fact, we were able to set up a sub-study with amyloid PET during the course of the Memento cohort. And some patients were offered to have either fluobutapir or flutemetamol. So what's the characteristic of the sample at baseline? So we have included in the sample 62% of women. The age is 72 years old. That's the median. Just to compare to other cohorts, so the CDR equal to 0.5 was present in 60% of participants, and the median MMSE was quite high. It was 28. We were able to have lumbar puncture for a bit more than 400 people. So first, what we have done is to try to explain the variability of the concentration of blood and CSF biomarkers in the Memento cohort. And this work was done by Vincent Bouteloup, who is a PhD in my group. So why did we do that? Because there are some publications showing that the plasma markers concentration is modified in presence of some factors, especially renal function, myocardial infarction, BMI, diabetes, hypertension, and pre-analytical condition also. But the study that have investigated these modifications were limited because the few studies have done that, and they predefined the factors that can modify plasma marker concentration in advance. So, and the way so far the variability of biomarkers concentration have been explored is really around statistical significance, and we wanted to go beyond that. So for that particular analysis, what we used is the sample of the subsample of individuals who had blood taken and a measurement of blood biomarker at inclusion. So the blood biomarkers were measured using a Simoa technique and the Quanterix analyzer. For CSF, we use InnoTest kits, and we limited, in fact, for CSF the person who had lumbar puncture less than 90 days between the blood sampling. For MRI, we used hypocampal volume, intracranial volume, and cortical thickness. For amyloid PET, we use amyloid positivity that are defined for each radioligand. So at that time, We didn't have the centiloids, but that's about to change. So the idea was to look at what correlates of AD are changing the concentration of AD biomarkers. So for that, we predefined some correlates that we wanted to look at. So we used the CDR sum of the boxes, the sum of the free recall at the Grober and Bushko test. We used the TMTB. For imaging biomarkers, we look at the ratio between hippocampal volume and intracranial volume. We used also the mean cortical thickness in AD-specific regions. For genetics, we looked at the E4 allele as well as the genetic risk score excluding APOE. And for factors that are potentially associated with the concentration but not correlates of AD, we look at age, sex, standard biological assessment, blood biomarkers, vascular risk factors, treatments only if they were present for more than 50 participants, and same from comorbidity. And we also look at pre-analytical characteristics. So these slides, so the first column showed blood biomarkers and how the proportion of variants that is explained by AD correlates. So you see that it's quite low. It goes from 1.3 for Abeta42 to 13.7 for NFL. But it's a bit lower than we would expect for a marker of disease. For CSF biomarker, it's a bit higher. It's almost twice higher for P2, and it's much higher for Abeta42 and the ratio Abeta42, Abeta40. And we also look at the subsample of individuals who had both blood biomarkers and CSF sample, lumbar puncture, sorry. And you see that the variance explained is a bit higher, and this is explained by the fact that people who had lumbar puncture were at higher risk of dementia. So that explains that we have a larger proportion of the variance explained in that subsample. So when we looked at other, at the same time at the clinical correlates and non-clinical correlates, you see that in fact the main correlates of that explains variance in both blood biomarkers and CSF biomarker is age. In fact, it's not totally true for CSF biomarker. It's still the AD correlate, but age explains a lot of the variance explained. Whereas for CSF biomarker, the other factors do not play a very strong role. And for blood biomarkers, the other factors that explain the variance are the standard biological measurements. So it's whether the blood was taken fast. How do you say? Fast? Okay, fasting. Okay, sorry. And also some, there's an association, but very small variance explained with treatment and comorbidities. So if we try to see how a blood biomarker can discriminate the prediction of pathological amyloid or pathological tau, you see that if we take only the blood biomarkers row, so without correction, we have some area under the curve that run from 0.63 for NFL to 0.74 for P2. But that's not great, but that's not too bad. But in fact, if we correct for the other biomarkers, other factors such as age or the factors that we found as non-AD associated with the variability. You see that the AUC decreased a little bit. So when we take into account age, in fact, the discriminative performances of blood biomarkers decrease a little bit. So what we have shown in that work is that there's a low proportion of the variance that is explained by AD clinical correlates for blood biomarkers. There's a major importance of age that should be taken into account. But what is also striking is that even in the best, in the models that have the more variables, a large part of the variance remains unexplained by the final models. So this is not... this has been found in other studies, and it shows some of the limitation of the blood biomarkers that have been used. But we need to see there are new biomarkers like new, not totally new, but new for the cohort that we will have access to soon, such as PTO 217 and PTO 212, and we might have better results and a better correlation with disease. So the other thing we've done, so that's work that's been done by Vincent Planche, who is the head of the clinical memory in Bordeaux. So we've tried to validate the performance of blood biomarkers to predict dementia, again in Memento. So I'm not going to show that. So what we have done is we've compared, so the C-index is a different measure of the validity, of the accuracy of the prediction models. So just to, between baseline and 5-year follow-up in Memento, there were about 250 people that became demented. And all dementia cases have been reviewed by a committee that was totally blind to any biomarker. So we don't do the dementia diagnosis based on biomarker, nor the etiology. So what we see in that slide is that if we use a blood biomarker alone, they are not really good predictor alone of dementia. So it ranges from 0.53 for total TO to 0.73 for PTO 181. But the combination leads to better results, so it doesn't work. The combination NFL, PTO 181, and the ratio A-beta 42, A-beta 40 leads to a C-index of 0.76. Anyway, this is if we consider only the blood biomarkers. But in a clinical setting, we usually have other information, so such as age, sex, education, memory. And in the second row, what we've done is we've compared the added value of blood biomarker to predict dementia compared to a reference model that includes these variables. And you see that we move from a C-index of 0.88 to a C-index of 0.90, and that's not a very high. So globally, we see that we do not improve very much the prediction performances if we add the best combination of blood biomarkers. We also compared the added value of blood biomarkers in a model that includes what is collected more in research settings. So we've added to the previous model APOE genotype and quantitative MRI. And you see here that we move from C-index of 0.91 to a C-index of 0.92, so it's a very little improvement, whereas it's a lot of data to collect potentially, so it's in fact, what the important message is for prediction, we do very well with what is already collected. So the blood biomarkers do not add very much to the 5-year risk prediction that include traditional predictors. These findings are more in line with the work led by Bruno Dubois and the International Working Group recommendation that suggests that clinical and radiological AD prodromal phenotype should be considered for fluid biomarkers in order to give to the patient some reliable advice in clinical practice. But again, we've done these analyses with biomarkers, blood biomarkers that are not the best on the market. So we need to replicate this analysis using newer AD biomarkers. And these are available in the database now. So I think AD blood biomarkers need to be validated before larger use. I've seen on the Alzheimer's Society website that there's a challenge to revolutionize dementia diagnosis using blood biomarkers. I think it's a very interesting and promising challenge, but we are a bit still some work needs to be done to go in that direction. And I think it will be a challenge to do real validation studies in the most recent cohorts, as most of the clinical diagnoses are not blind to biological results. So, oh, there was another one. Okay, oh. Okay, so what should be the criteria to make a biomarker adequate for use in research and practice? We should go back to the basic. We should focus on the sensitivity, the specificity, unbiased performance, and the cost difficulty of assessment relevant for both research and clinical use. For clinical practice, we must also consider relevance for care pathway that improve patient outcomes. And as a surrogate endpoint for evaluating intervention, is the biomarker, what we need to wonder is the biomarker unquestionably central to biological mechanism, and can we change the biomarker without changing clinical outcomes? That's a question that remains, I'm afraid. Thank you.
So, Carole, thank you very much. It's lovely to see an epidemiologic context here. I've always admired Memento for being one of the best population-based studies with repeated biomarker measurements on a frequent basis. So that means you have lots of blood hidden somewhere in freezers. I would think that to do, if you like, a detailed proteomic scan to identify more specific pathways would be, you are in a unique position to do that.
Okay, you'll give me the check at the end of the session? That's all I need. Sebastian, of course.
Thank you for such an amazing talk, Carole. So we have the set of results of these biomarkers being used in kind of tertiary neurology settings where there's quite a screened population in that cohort. You presented things when people presented to memory clinics. We talked yesterday a little bit about the potential in the future for screening asymptomatic, cognitively unimpaired people in the community for their biomarkers. Were we to have results from trials to suggest that we might get those people onto monoclonal antibodies and reduce future dementia. Based on your results, could you comment on what you think the likelihood of being able to use p-tau217 in the future as a screening tool for unimpaired people in the community?
Well, I would be I think we need, for people unimpaired,
yeah,
I think we are not there. So I would not use, we need to see the performance of the other biomarkers. So I think P212 and 217 are more correlated with CSF biomarker. So but right now, with so what I've presented was with P2181, and I would not use this one at all for screening. I mean, that's not exactly what I've presented, but we have another paper that looks at how, but that doesn't answer your question, but you say in totally asymptomatic persons. I don't have the answer, but I don't, given it doesn't work in people with some symptoms, I would doubt that it's relevant in the general population.
I'm a neurologist and an academic, and I split my time between the clinics and sort of working on particularly neuroimaging, but trying to understand these diseases through biomarkers, but also trying to translate AI machine learning into memory clinics. So I'm going to sort of particularly try and address that today. And we'll start off just thinking about what are some of the challenges. I think they've actually been highlighted really well by both Tim's talk and by Art, going through what are some of the issues that we face in dementia and memory clinics. And I'll just highlight one or two of those. Give you a quick brief overview of some of the AI solutions which are sort of emerging and around. And then really sort of talk about the main thing I want to concentrate on is this gathering real-world memory data. And I'm a very big advocate of the data that we collect in clinics should be used for research. Our patients are very keen on that. I'm very keen on that. So that's what I've tried to do in this quantitative MRI and NHS memory clinic study, and we'll talk a bit about that. And then at the end, just go through what some of a few of the challenges left. I think there are still lots of challenges, but at least we'll go through some of them. So what are the issues that I as a neurologist and my colleagues in psychiatry and other specialties and our patients face in memory clinics? Well, we're not amazing at diagnosis, and particularly some of the rarer types of dementia. So this is data from an audit of memory clinics across the UK, and we're picking up about half of the people that we should be with dementia with Lewy bodies based on sort of epidemiological data. And for frontotemporal dementia, it's even worse. We're picking up only about 1/10 of the people that we know should be coming to our clinics. So we should be able to do better on diagnosis. Added to that is, and the next question that people ask when they come to the clinic is, what happens next? What's going to happen to me over the next few years? And we can get a little bit of information about that from the diagnosis that someone's had. So if someone has progressive supranuclear palsy, we know that their progression is quite rapid. If they have semantic dementia, it tends to be much slower. But if you look, within Alzheimer's disease or within behavioural variant frontotemporal dementia, there's a massive range of survival and progression. So there's heterogeneity, not only between diagnoses, but also within diagnoses. And I think this is an area where AI can really help us. I think we have the information that's available. I think Carole showed that really nicely, that the data that we've got and the diagnosis that we make is pretty good. But I think we can do more at squeezing out of that data more information to help with improved diagnosis, but also address this issue of prognosis. And that's not only relevant for clinical aspects, but also this is about translation, thinking about clinical trials, selecting people for clinical trials, looking at biomarkers which are going to track people over time and shows response to treatments. I think AI and neuroimaging, along with other types of biomarkers, can really help with that, I think. So, have we got the tools to do this? Well, the simple answer is yes, really. So this is a review which the imaging working group of the Deep Dementia Phenotyping, the DEMON Network, published a couple of years ago. And we looked at a bucket load of papers, and we found about 250 tools which are looking at dementia using just neuroimaging, no other biomarkers, and AI. So there are lots of tools which are available, and these were highly accurate. I'm not going to go, have a look at the paper if you want to know some more details, but most of these tools performed really well. They're getting, 90% plus accuracy. There's increasing use of neural networks and deep learning approaches. increasing use of combining different imaging modalities. There are a few barriers that need to be addressed, particularly around, we had about 20 papers looking at early Alzheimer's disease and 18 different definitions of early Alzheimer's disease. So we do need a bit of standardization to be able to compare these algorithms. But one of the real big challenges was that only 2 of these 250 algorithms we looked at had been validated in an independent data set, and only 1 of those in a real-world setting where it didn't work. So we do need to, if these are going to be translated into clinical practice, we do need to think about that independent validation and that real-world validation. And that we published a couple of years ago, and that's now woefully out of date. So I was asked to write a book chapter about AI in neurodegenerative disease, and I thought, well, I'll just a quick look at the literature, see what's out there. And there's about 4,000 papers. This is sort of after whittling them down. But more than half of those have been within the last sort of 2-3 years. So this is a massively, exponentially increasing field. And most of it is focused on Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. And the reason for that, it's all down to art really, because if you look at the increase in number of papers, and particularly the application of deep learning models, is based on the availability of data from ADNI. So it's just really to highlight and the real impact that ADNI has had on this field. There's challenges there that ADNI doesn't include other diseases. There are some, I haven't shown it here, but there are some increasing numbers of papers in less common diseases, frontotemporal dementia or dementia with Lewy bodies or PSP. But not at the same level as Alzheimer's disease because of the availability of data. So making data freely available really does have a massive impact on what we're able to do. So in that context, then, ADNI is great, and I love it as a data set. It's really rich. It's freely available. It's large, and you can be very confident about the diagnoses of people who are in that data set. But the people who are in ADNI aren't necessarily similar to the people who come to my memory clinic, who have different diseases. Some of them don't have dementia. They might have young onset dementia. They might have genetic forms of dementia. They'll have comorbidities. They're a lot older. Certainly in the community memory clinics, people tend to be a lot older than the people who are in ADNI. There's a lot more diversity in terms of the background and education and so on in the people that we see in memory clinics. So I think that's a real motivator to get real world data from our clinics. So we've set up this quantitative MRI in NHS memory clinics study a few years ago, and this was actually there was a little sort of pilot study before this that Dennis Channer set up in Cambridge, and then he sort of moved elsewhere. So I sort of took it on after that. And really my sort of priorities for this data set are that it's unselective as to who comes into the study. So the only criteria to come into quantitative MRI in NHS memory clinic study is that you walk into a memory clinic and you need a scan. It doesn't matter what your diagnosis is, what your age is, what your comorbidities are. And I thought that when I set this up, this was quite a good thing to do. But what I've realised now is that actually it's one of the few data sets available where there are multiple diagnoses within the same data set. So if you want to look at frontotemporal dementia, there's a frontotemporal dementia research data set. There's obviously Alzheimer's research data sets. There's a DLB data sets. But there's very few cohorts which actually have all of those diagnoses in one data set. I completely agree with Art that making data available is key. So if you want this data, it is available on the Dementia Platforms UK. If you go through the portal and request it, they'll send me an email and I'll say, yep, you can have it. So really want people to make use of it. And just before I forget later on, we're releasing another data freeze, hopefully at the end of this month. It might take a month or two for the data to be completely available on Dementia Platform UK, but we have got another data freeze coming up soon. And Another key aspect is to make recruitment easy. To be integrated into memory clinic services is not that straightforward. They're busy. We're massively oversubscribed in our memory clinic at the moment. We're having to sort of reorganize our clinics so that we can fit more people in. So in that environment where there's service pressures, to try and then add a research study into that is quite a challenge. So we've tried to make the recruitment process as easy as possible. So we're just collecting minimal data when people come to clinic. And then we can potentially go back and add to that data later on. And we want it to be representative. So we've deliberately gone to memory clinics which are not only the ivory tower type memory clinics that I'm part of in Cambridge, but also the community-based memory clinics run by psychiatrists. And we've tried to look at different populations around the UK as well. So for the imaging nerds, hi. This is sort of my territory as well. We've tried to follow the UK Biobank protocol as far as possible, so that anything that we learn from UK Biobank, any techniques and methods, pre-processing can be applied to this QMNMC data set. The only thing we've changed is we've got a souped-up diffusion sequence, which runs in 5 minutes. It's multi-band, multi-shell, and it's very powerful. But apart from that, it's the same as the UK Biobank protocol. And we run that in all of the different NHS and academic centres which are doing the imaging for us. So we've got a variety of different scanners and settings, all running as close to the UK Biobank protocol as we can get. And we've got some Siemens scanners, some Philips scanners, so we can look at the differences between those. So not every site can do the entire set of sequences. So the functional MRI and DTI is available at more of the academic sites, but otherwise we're collecting a sort of standard set of imaging, and we've got standard pre-processing with those. And the imaging community is I think a bit ahead of the game in terms of making data sets standardized, making protocols and pre-processing standardized, and something called BIDS format, with which you can put your imaging in, and then you can apply any kind of pre-processing and analysis to that. So our data is in BIDS format, so it makes it easy for people to run a range of different analyses. So as well as making data available, we've used the UK Biobank protocol, we've used BIDS format to make it easy for researchers to use and make use of. So, of course, I'm not the only person doing this and collecting real-world data. These are just the ones that I could sort of thought of off the top of my head the other day. We're going to put this slide together of different real-world data sets. And they've all got slightly different emphases, and some are available, some are not so freely available. But there's a fantastic number of people who are thinking along the same lines and collecting real-world data. And we all talk to each other as well. So particularly Vanessa, Charlie, and Ash, and Rosa and Agnes, we work quite a bit together to make sure that we're doing similar things and we can compare between the different data sets. So, for example, the Oxford Brain Health Clinic is using exactly the same imaging protocol that we're using in QMNMC, so that we can use those in parallel. So at the moment, we've recruited about 1,400 people, and that's from 11 sites around the country. As you can see here, we've got a range of different sites. Essex is the 11th site we've just added very recently. It hasn't quite made it to the slide yet, and that's growing almost exponentially as well as we add more sites. So if you're in a trust that is interested in recruiting to this study, please do get in touch. Very happy to add you. And I haven't had to advertise for different trusts to come and contribute to this because it's an NIHR portfolio study, so they get some money for participating. We run the study on a bit of a shoestring because we've through the NIHR we've managed to convince them that the scans are part of routine clinical care. So the NHS pays for the scans and we get the data for free. So that makes it a very scalable study, but it also makes it very much integrated into routine clinical care. So what can we do with this data? So I'll just give you a couple of examples of things which we've been looking at trying to do. So firstly, I'm interested in seeing what features we can extract from these images that we can take forward into machine learning and AI models for sort of novel biomarkers. So if we look at white matter disease, this is what we do with a lot of scans. We sort of squint at it and say, well, you know, there's a bit of white fluffy stuff on the scan here, and we can grade that as 1, 2, or 3. There are some tools available which will segment that white matter for you, but to score to do these scores, it's not only the volume and number of fluffy white dots on the scan, but the confluence of how merged the white spots are becoming over time. So Tanya, one of my PhD students, tackled this and looked at how we can model the confluence between these lesions as a quantitative measure. Basically, you can put a Gaussian distribution over each of the white dots, and then you can compare that to the white matter around that lesion, and that gives you an idea of how merged the dots are becoming. And this is actually slightly borrowed from astrophysics, where they do the same sort of thing with galaxies, but we've sort of adapted it for MRI scans. And it seems to work very well. And it correlates, as you'd expect, with age, and also with some cognitive tests. I've just shown a total score here, but it also correlates with verbal fluency, which is a sort of proxy for sort of speed of mental flexibility, which you would expect. The more fluffy white stuff and white matter disease in your brain, the slower your processing is going to be. And we've worked with colleagues in Germany with the DZ&E data set to validate this measurement as well. And they were able to take our code, run it very easily and simply, and give us back the results with very similar correlations for age and cognition. So that's just an example of one of the ways which we're sort of trying to extract quantitative information from these scans that we can take forward for machine learning models. And just to give you a quick example of a machine learning algorithm that we've applied to this data set. So working with Zoe Kurtzy in the psychology department in Cambridge, and she's developed this machine learning tool which uses partial least squares regression to identify regions of interest within people with mild cognitive impairment, which predict later Alzheimer's disease. And applying a regression approach called GMLVQ, we can then look at how fast someone is moving from a sort of normal model, if you like, to an Alzheimer's disease model, which gives us an idea of prognosis. So that's was trained in ADNI, as a lot of these things are, and we got pretty good accuracies. We also looked at an aging cohort where they had Chao. This has been people without dementia, and the prognostic score followed the Chao accumulation in that population. So what we're able to do then is then take that to our real-world data, and for this we used the CUMEN-MC data set and a Singapore memory clinic data set. And in CUMEN-MC, we're able to look at, see that this does distinguish between mild cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. But also what I like about this is that there's quite a range of different scores here. So we're able to pick out people with MCI who are going to stay stable and people who are going to progress. So from a clinical point of view, this is really helpful. Most clinics in the UK most memory clinics will see people once and discharge them. If we have a way of picking up, 5–10% of people who are going to progress more rapidly, we can then target our resources to those people and be proactive in monitoring them for progression and problems, rather than at the moment where we're reactive and waiting for a crisis to happen and then step in. The Singapore memory clinic data has been running longer than we have and had sort of 5 years of follow-up. And we're able to show that this score wasn't just predictive in the short term, but also in the longer term, over 5 years as well. So I think Dementia Platform UK has been really helpful, actually, in many ways. Firstly, managing the sort of data sharing. So I give my data to DPUK, and they manage sort of data access and making it available to people, which as a data owner that is incredibly helpful. But it also means that we can link with other data sets as well. So I just put a few examples here, and this is by no means comprehensive, but as I mentioned, because we're using the same imaging protocol as a biobank, we can translate what we've learned from the biobank into QMNMC. Through Dementia Platforms UK, we're looking at linking to other biomarker studies such as readout. So people who are in QMNMC and readout, we can put the blood biomarkers and the imaging together. There are other imaging cohorts and other cohorts such as Memento. So I'm glad I put that on the slide for Carole. And there are other cohorts as well. So we can use analysis. We can harmonize those different data sets together to get more powerful results from the analysis. But for this conference as well, we can also link to things like the trials delivery framework and chatting to Paresh in AD Smart. Can we use the QMNMC MRI scans that people have had when they come for their diagnosis as the first scan in their drug trial? So we're starting to sort of bring everything together and sort of work with other sort of movements and sort of collaboratives to try and make sure that we're all on the same page. We're collecting standardized data, we're sharing that data, we're making it available, and we're making it translational and useful for things like developing new biomarkers and for clinical trials. So just in the last sort of few minutes, just to sort of think about some of the challenges which are ahead, and there are quite a few, and I'm not going to mention all of them, but just to cover a few issues. So in the Deep Dementia Phenotyping Network, we've been running a Delphi process over the last year or so, where we've asked people who are in the field what they think are the challenges and how we can overcome those. And this is sort of in the final draft stages at the moment, so should be hopefully published within the next few months. But these are the different issues that are sort of barriers really between interesting things that we found in research and actually applying those into the clinic. So, really being clear about what's useful in terms of diagnosis and prognosis, thinking about differential diagnosis, thinking about data quality, and particularly that validation came up as a very important topic and something to address. Then thinking about how we interact with clinicians who are going to put these into practice, particularly making sure they have the right training and that they know how to use these kind of AI machine learning algorithms. And then, of course, the issues of ethics and privacy. So with Neil Oxtoby at UCL a few years ago, we sort of had a bash at trying to do some federated learning within NHS systems. And this was a sort of overall sort of plan. So so you can run your sort of local model within your NHS system and send the parameters of that model to a centrally federated server, which then can feed the information back locally. So the advantage of this is the data doesn't leave your local server, but you can combine, you can federate that model between different sites. So we ran this between Harlow, Prince Alexandra Hospital, and Cambridge. I'd love to say this was a stunning success. I think we learned a lot more than we sort of achieved. We did manage to run a federated learning model between these two sites. But we learned about what are the technical challenges here of trying to implement things within NHS systems. We had a really good programmer who developed this infrastructure as code approach, which makes it much easier to implement code within a remote system. And really, engaging the right people at the right level of seniority within the trust to be able to drive this forward and actually put things in place. And just finally, with Ash Venkataram and Charlie Marshall, we've put together this sort of roadmap, if you like, of some of the issues that we need to address particularly within the UK, to get from where we are now to implementing AI machine learning in clinic. And you can see this is quite a complex slide, really. And in terms of the research side of things, it's sort of over here. But then there's a whole load of regulatory, computational, evaluation, validation, and sort of scaling issues that we need to address to really put this into the real world and into clinical practice. So, I think I'd like you to just sort of think really about how you might use some of this data that we're collecting in the real world, how you might contribute to that, but also from industry side as well, how we might scale some of this up, and how we might address some of the barriers which are limiting limiting our translation into the real world. So I think it's an exciting time for AI. I think it's an exciting time for imaging. And there's a lot of things which are coming together, and a lot of people that are working together and linking these different data sets and these different ideas. So we're pulling in the right direction. I think there's still a little way to go before we're going to truly have translation. But I think it's not too far away. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Fabulous talk, as always. One of the things I'm grappling with is when you're validating these types of tools with real-world data, how you cope with the issue of validating against a clinical diagnosis that we know is wrong so much of the time. And I haven't quite figured out how we should be dealing with that. So I'm wondering what you think.
Yeah, I think it is a real challenge. I think maybe biomarkers will help with that as they become more widely available. I think Carole's talk of that was really interesting and help understand what the role of blood biomarkers might be. We're sort of thinking of taking a slightly different approach as well, rather than looking at diagnosis, look at individual symptoms and features. So Tanya, who's a PhD student who's doing the work on T2 confidence score, has also developed a sort of ontology of different features of neurodegenerative diseases, so from the history and examination. So I think that might be another approach to that. So rather than saying, my patient has this disease, my patient has these symptoms and signs, and that might be a better approach. So we're exploring that.
Hi, Tim. I noticed that you had different magnitudes and different scanners, make models, what have you. How does the AI deal with the harmonization process of having these different makes and models and magnitudes?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The short answer is that for that paper that we published, didn't actually use all of the data that was available from the different sites. So we just used sites from scans from one site. So I've slightly glossed over that, slightly deliberately. So it's something we're looking at the moment in terms of harmonization and what the site effects are going to be. There are tools available, like Combat, for example, which should do a good job of managing those differences. The challenge with Combat is it only looks for linear differences, so we're exploring potential other sort of machine learning approaches to that harmonization as well. And we're looking at trying to get some money to do a traveling heads study as well, so we can see what the effects are at different sites with that approach. So yeah, I think harmonization is an issue. I think there's two approaches. Either you sort of look at the covariates in great detail and work out exactly what adjustment needs to be for each site, or you ignore it and you develop your data and you validate it in an independent data set and see if it works. So I think there's two slightly, a very pragmatic approach or a very sort of detailed approach. And I think we probably need to do a bit of both.
I'm Chao, a research associate in the University of Cambridge. My talk today is about AI-guided detection of Alzheimer's disease based on blood marker and cognition. As we know, there are various biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease, and they usually emerge at different stages across the cognitive normal, MCI, and AD. But the use of amyloid PET and CSF are very limited in the routine practice because they are expensive, invasive, and typically used only after a full workup. And some of the tests are not covered by the insurance. So we are trying to looking for other alternative options, such as digital cognitive function test and blood test, especially for the blood test. If we can use the blood test to replace amyloid PET and CSF, that will be a very much more attractive option. So with this in mind, our research question is whether replacing amyloid PET and CSF by using the blood marker and cognition to support the reliable detection of AD, which can provide a more accessible and more cost-effective tool for the AD diagnosis. So for the data set we use here is quite a new cohort. from the Biohammer study. This is a population-based data set, and all the participants are clarified into MCI, CN, and AD. So now, here is our data workflow. Basically, we included all the demographic data, blood tests, and cognition and PET image measures. On top of that, we also think about the different ethnic and ethnicity background. For example, we use the non-Hispanic white people to train the model and leave another 3 test sets. Here is a simple overview of all the relevant features. There are different blood markers and also different cognition tests. So now we have our research question ready, our data set ready. Here is our machine learning model, GMLVQ, Generalized Metric Learning Vector Quantization. We train the model by using the 10-fold cross-validation. On each fold, we use the resampling to achieve the class balance. And we also applied the ensemble methods to achieve the model robust. So when we train the model, we use different combination of features. Start from the age, sex, education. Then on top of that, we add blood marker, cognition, and amyloid, and then combine all measures together. So here we can see the model performance is better within the model 1 plus blood marker and cognition. We can see clearly here from the ROC curve, from the orange 1 model 5, which include blood marker and cognition, the performance is better than the model 4, which is the purple color. And the similar results also found in the MCI and AD classification task. So another key point in the machine learning model is the interpretability. So here we plot the metric tensor. From here, we can see how different features interact with each other and how the single features contribute to the model performance. If we ranking the different features, we can see the ranking model. We can ranking the table here from the top to the bottom. Among the top 5 features, we can see the PTO 217 and NFL contribute a lot to the model performance. In addition to that, we also found the shape discrimination and visual silence in these 2 classification tasks. So finally, after we finish the model training, we extract the relevant parameters from the pre-trained model and then to calculate the prognostic index for each participants. So in the independent data set, we can calculate the index for these 3 groups. And we can clarify these 3 different groups by using the prognostic index. And similar finding also found from the non-Hispanic Black group and also in the Hispanic group. So here is a quick summary. We identify the top blood markers and also the top cognitive test. If we combine these 2, the model performance is better than the amyloid PET. Finally, this is my acknowledgement. Thanks, my supervisor and all the team members. Thank you.
Thanks for your talk. That was wonderful. I'm also a fellow ECR working with the Bioharmonics data set. So 2 specific questions. The first one would be, did you use the cognitive status ascertainment provided by Bioharmonics, or did you leave that out? And the second question would be, did you account for study site? Because obviously there's multiple providers that gave data, so just speak a bit to the effect of how many sites you used to combine your data set.
Yeah, thanks for your question. For the first one, the cognition test, we use the 3 cognition digital tests from the Linus company and also another 10 subtests from the Cognition company. So there are also other measures from other company, but we choose this one based on the previous study, and also they provide very comprehensive data sets.
What I mean is that in the BioHermes, we had healthy participants and participants with dementia, with mild dementia. Did you use that information at all, or did you just use the cognitive scores?
We only use the subtest cognitive scores. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mohammad Shafiqur. I'm Research Associate at University of Cambridge. In this talk, I will introduce the genes and cognition study, which is nested within NIHR BioResource, and I will share some preliminary findings. So motivation. So large-scale clinical trials fails, majority of them, and is one of the main reasons might be that treatments are tested at late when the brain damage already occurred. So therefore, to test any treatment at preclinical stage and prodromal stage is important. So that's why we need a large number of people to recruit large number of people and follow them up, and who will be willing to be recalled again for experimental trials. So therefore, we established genes and cognition study to serve this need, and it's nested within NIHR BioResource, and is complementary to the other available resources worldwide. So what's the study design is that we reach out to all the NIHR BioResource participants, and so 21,000 participants agreed to take part in the study, and these participants have gone through 11 cognitive tests online, and you can see this, and the 10,000 of these 21,000 people genetic data was available at the time of this analysis. And out of this 11 tests, we could actually take two latent variables, and which we labeled as G6 and G4 is a measure of general cognitive ability. Next, here we plotted the cognitive test result across age and gender. And here is the example of 3 tests: reaction test, quiz, and vocabulary respectively. And we can see the difference between males and females. And this difference, although in the quiz and vocabulary, you can see there's some difference, but it's not actually if you see the overall distribution of the test. So it's very negligible, the difference, the variation between males and females. And when we plotted them, this score according to the genomic risk of Alzheimer's disease, and the lower row, you can see the red one, those with the high risk of Alzheimer's disease, and the blue is the low risk of Alzheimer's disease. And we can see the test score actually deviate at age 55 for G6, and G4 we can't actually detect anything. This suggests that the reaction test, and just so as we can see, the G6 actually falls the group of tests which actually covers reaction time, processing speed, attention. So that might be the G6, and those reaction time and processing speed might be the important in diagnosing Alzheimer's disease at preclinical stage. So next, we checked what is if there is any genetic variance we find in terms of G4 and G6, and is there any pathway? And we found there's for G4 we could link to the interferon gamma induced microglia activation, which relates to the inflammation. And for G6, we link that to a gene called GVE1, and it relates to glycogen metabolism. So these two mechanisms might be important in early stage, but it's a cross-sectional data. We can't actually say anything about whether this could be target or not. So we have to follow this cognition and see is there any cognitive decline, and how the mechanism of the declines, if we can find out any mechanism or pathway that actually relates to the decline. So it's a cross-sectional cognitive performance. And thanks to the PIs of the Genes and Cognition cohort and collaborators and funders, Alzheimer's Society and the BioResource volunteers and all of you.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. I wonder how, you detected the inflammation and if there was also any cortical indicators for that inflammation relating to cognitive decline in your research.
Okay, so what we did, we link our genome-wide association study data to the available microglia expression quantitative trait loci data, and we see the colocalization, which suggests that, and we saw the colocalization for 4 genes in that regions for microglia. So that's how, and when we also took that regions and group of genes from that regions, and we did the pathway enrichment, and the interferon gamma induced microglia actually showing up as the top pathway. So that's why we think that it might be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so this section, we're going to open it up to general questions. We've heard a lot of different aspects here, and I guess we're opening it up to the floor. Is there any burning questions to start?
Hi, this question's for Tim. Tim, I think you mentioned ADNI being a very homogeneous cohort, non-representative. But I think what ADNI is doing now with their ADNI 4 phase is they're recruiting specifically people from an ethnic minority background, I think African American, Latino, and Asian. How do you see this influencing AI and machine learning research for dementia?
Yeah, I think it's a really good thing to look at. We published a paper a year or two ago which looked at all the available imaging cohorts and looked at what ethnicities you could actually do comparisons between with all the data available, assuming you could harmonize everything, and you can make some comparisons between what's labeled for white and black ethnicities, but not much else. I think in addition to collating ethnicities within, like the UK or the US, I think we need to expand to other countries as well. So there's a Lasidad study in India, which is great, I think. We're looking at setting up Cuban MC in Qatar as well. So hopefully we'll sort of expand internationally. Yeah, my gut feeling is that the effect of the disease will be greater than any effect of ethnicity, but we won't know that until we look. So I think it's really important. It might be that probably where the differences will be in the effect of white matter disease. Yeah.
You might also want to look at HABS HD, which is mostly Black and Hispanic.
Yeah.
And you're right about the effect of the disease, but the lifestyle effect is considerably different in these cohorts.
Yeah, yeah.
So if I may be so bold, I mean, we heard the talks today and all of you are in different modalities, in all fairness. How, in your opinion, can we bring these modalities together? Because all the science you spoke about was really complicated. And I think it's complicated in your own modality, but how do you get the power of multimodality coming together?
We're sort of trying to do that in a small scale in Oxford Discovery, and it's about training models, like you've seen some really nice models here with some basic imaging metrics, clinical and blood-based, very pragmatic. But to really replicate that, you need much larger data sets with the matched metrics that you're doing. One of the issues with digitals particularly is that there's just so many different apps out there. And a lot of it, in terms of the analysis, is black box for any company that won't make available raw data to share. But I think there are a number of initiatives trying to improve that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always in the data. If you have enough of it, you can partition it up in a way that allows you to answer all kinds of questions.
Yeah, in the Demon Network, we're doing follow-up review to the one that I presented, looking at the combinations of imaging with other biomarkers. And I think one of the challenges we're finding is the lack of standardization in a sense. So there's lots of data, but it's all slightly different, and you don't have the same combinations. Even with MRI, if having the same sequences in different studies, which limits the amount of data that you can gather. But I think we definitely need to be looking at how to standardize that across different studies and different countries.
Yeah, I think the studies like ADNI have really, that's one of the things that ADNI has brought is really standardized, have protocols that are standardized across studies, and it's definitely something we should try to do even better.
I mean, it wouldn't be a bad idea for some working groups to have a common denominator set of sequences in the MR case and protocols in PET that people could adopt as a minimum component of their protocol. They could add on top of that to the things that might be specific to their study. But at least having that common denominator that people globally had agreed upon would be a worthwhile effort for various groups to get together and try and accomplish.
Can't possibly let this discussion go without mentioning Vanessa Raymond and what she's doing with the Child's Delivery Framework and pulling exactly that, so that there's a group of memory clinics across the UK are using the same protocols.
I think global is important.
Yeah, and I agree. Yeah.
We're also doing that for a minimal common clinical data set for prodromal Parkinson's, because around the world there are probably around 40 different cohorts and everyone's doing slightly different things.
If I'd be a bit more controversial, if we locked you all in the same room, would you end up battling like a warrior for your domain of science, or could you actually all work together across biomarker, imaging, proms, machine learning, etc.? Is it possible for after I fed you, of course, that you have a combined science?
I think we do it already.
That's exactly what I was going to say. We're going to get all it.
It's done.
I'm working with Michele.
I said it was controversial.
We already do the ADNI protocol in our centre.
It's beautiful. Any questions from the floor?
Non-controversial question, please.
More controversial, the better. Mr. Gallagher.
John's got one.
Yeah,
sorry.
go.
So when we've been looking at DPUK datasets, they come into us in all shapes and forms, some of them very well curated, some of them less well curated, etc., etc. The challenge to us has always been, how do you standardize in a way that increases scientific opportunity without reducing academic freedom? And if you're doing things at scale, but you want to therefore use cost-effective methods, but if you want to be innovative, how do you find the sweet spot? That's my question.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, I'm not a particularly big fan of standardization. I think at our stage, it stifles innovation. So yes, there'll be some minor variances in how the data were collected or even how it was described. But ontologies and harmonization efforts allow one to retain that unique flavor, but make them comparable with something else. And so that's where I land about it. That may not be the right thing, but that's what I think.
I mentioned the BIDS format in the neuroimaging world, and I think the neuroimaging are probably a little bit ahead of the game in this. So the BIDS coalition is people who sit around the table and try and thrash out what the standard format should be, what the labeling should be, and I think each field has to decide what their sort of data format should look like, which has enough flexibility to allow for variation, but allowing for standard ways of analysing the data. So it's a good model.
Thank you. I have a question for Dr. Carole Dufouil. And I wonder if the association between APOE4 homozygous and brain atrophy in subcortical areas was also looked at in your research. Thank you.
The association between APOE and cortical?
APOE4 homozygous and brain atrophy in subcortical areas.
The question is whether we have an association?
Yeah, because you mentioned that was one of the variables. I mean, of course, you mentioned at least participants needed to have one, APOE4 heterozygous. They needed to be at least heterozygous, but I believe then you also had homozygous carriers in your research. So I was wondering if that was also investigated to a degree, because we know that then when they are homozygous, the risk is higher to develop Alzheimer later in life. So, and we also have age-related age-related shrinkage of brain areas, in particular in subcortical areas. So that's of a higher degree in people having Alzheimer. So I was wondering if that was investigated in your research.
Yes, so we have looked at APOE4 genotype in relation to most MRI biomarker, and it's a strong determinant for all. I mean, APOE4 is a strong determinant. Full point.
If we truly embrace complexity, are we in danger of generating answers that we can't understand ourselves?
That's the sort of question I like.
Yeah, why is that a bad thing? We might not be able to understand it now, but we could actually probably work towards understanding it.
So if I can push back on that, if we truly integrate multimodal data at scale, are we going to outstrip the limits of human understanding? So if we take an interaction between two binary variables, that's easy. But then we go, well, we have two-way interactions, three-way interactions. We can very quickly go way beyond what we can visualize or understand. And the kind of models that we're building at the moment are interpretable to some degree. The bit in the middle may be a black box, but the answers are interpretable. But what if what we really need, what if the most powerful answers are things that are still beyond us?
Anyone take that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the sort of clinical world, we like things to be interpretable and transparent. But I think there is an argument to say that it doesn't matter as long as the answer is correct. So I think it really depends on what the question is. But the brain is complex. So by its very nature, what we're looking at is a complex system with interactions that we don't fully understand. So I think we are going to get some interactions which we don't fully understand. But if you're starting with a strong hypothesis, you're answering a specific question, I think that's okay. But to some extent, interpretability is good. But I think most of the important questions have simpler answers than that. I think on the whole.
See, I would argue that many models can render down these complex relationships in a way that provide some level of understanding. That's one of the reasons we model things.
To test hypotheses.
Yeah, you can use it's a representation of complex data that's simplified, establishing the relationships between them in either a statistical or visual way. But whether you fully understand the actual data, maybe not, but that might be all right.
Thank you for a wonderful morning. With the data sets we're getting, which we're putting out for public domain to use, they're going to be very specific and are being used frequently for a lot of modeling, for the AI modeling in particular. Are we going to reach a point where we're going to have models which have been trained on a very specific data set, which is then applied to other data sets and is not necessarily applicable?
Yep, absolutely right.
That's already happening now.
It's a problem.
So how do we overcome it?
Make more.
More data available?
And more of these things. And I tried to make the point where atlases or maps that are representative of specific cohorts are used that way. And I think the very same thing is ultimately going to be happening with AI learning sets going to be applicable only to something that's relevant to that learning set. And that's okay. And then we can build upon that and say, well, these three learning sets have some similarities and some differences. And that can be incorporated. So I think the specificity is important, because of the group differences that we already talked about. So, I mean, I think that's the nature of it.
There's also the concept of transfer learning as well. So you can learn on one data set and use that as a starting point to retrain on another data set. I think that's okay to do that.
If the ADNI data set made such a substantial difference to the world, like you said, how do we promote people to basically make their data accessible, whether that be open or accessible is a fine line, isn't it? Like, is it a social obligation to do that? And how do we encourage that?
I think it will be quite easy for Europe in a few years because the new law is you have to share the data. So that data sharing in the European health data space is an obligation. So that's a way to make people sharing the data. I think then there's a problem. I don't know how. I mean, people in ADNI were really generous. Then there's a problem. If we share the data, we need to find a way to compensate those who collect data in the career. Right now, I think, at least for France, we don't give enough credit in the science and to people who collect data. And if collection is sharing immediately, it might be counterproductive for people to start new studies.
First of all, I just want to congratulate everybody on that panel for their willingness to share data. Okay, I think that is really encouraging. I think the big problem is not having metrics of data sharing. So I applied to a grant funding body. They say, what is your data sharing strategy? And I tell them, we want to do this. We're very keen to do that. But it's never measurable in a fair way to all parties concerned. And therefore, it doesn't get measured. And therefore, the PIs or the research team aren't directly accountable for it. One of the advantages of data being stored in central repositories is that data sharing is fully auditable. And it's not just a matter of access requests, it's a matter of access requests agreed. And then it would be a matter of the next stage of the publications achieved. So I think we really can do this by incentivizing people to put their data in a more managed environment, and then funders using that as a way of auditing actual behavior of scientists. So I think it really is possible, but in the current infrastructure, then it's not really quantifiable accurately.
So I was also going to sort of talk a bit about, it's our responsibility as people who are sharing the data to actually ensure that if we're sharing it with someone, they will actually be able to achieve what they want to. And that's why we have set up this data access thing. And we've been, we were never set up, the Discovery Cohort was never set up as a data sharing biobank cohort, but our funders wanted us to do that. And we had to find the means to do it. And often what's the key bit is that we have a statistician on our data access panel who often says actually that you're not going to do this, you're not going to actually be able to achieve this, and then we'll send it back and suggest revisions and come back, and you then know. And then the other thing is that we've built in a thing where we insist we get a report 12 months later based on what has this data actually produced. Have you had a publication? Has it led to another project application or pilot data?
Yeah, I think data sharing is really important. I think, and I think it is a social obligation. And I think we owe it to the patients that give us their data to make it available for science. So I think there is a social aspect and an ethical aspect to it as well. The one slight problem with that is around intellectual property. And when it comes to trying to commercialize some of these things, you have an investor. They say, what's your intellectual property? Well, it's not the data. All our models are on Git repositories and published. That's so that becomes more challenging. I think there are ways around that, but I think we need to think about the governance around intellectual property and how we use that data as well.
I have a slightly contrarian point of view.
Fantastic.
In the US, the funders have mandated data sharing for almost a decade now. And the reality is, it hasn't worked.
No, it doesn't work.
It doesn't work because they say, oh yes, we have a data sharing plan. We will share data. Well, when? And what are you going to share? And how well documented is it? And how much metadata goes with it? Well, they have countless ways of weaseling out of their obligations, and they use them because they don't want to. The fact of the matter is most investigators hold data near and dear to their heart. That's where the blood and sweat from their efforts went into it, and it's theirs. And they don't want to give it out, and they don't want you to publish on it because they haven't written their paper first. That's the reality of it. So when the ADNI example is a good one because, as I said, and when you use ADNI data, you are obligated to put in the author list and the ADNI executive committee or something like that. You say ADNI. And the author's name isn't there. My name's not there, but it's translated there in PubMed.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's this weird halfway place that makes all the ADNI participants that collect data like me happy. So that, to me, is a way that provides that incentivization. And just because I'm a sort of curmudgeon about these things, I've written a paper, which will come out in a month or so, which describes the reality of this sort of incentivization and where it works and where it doesn't. Because right now, it actually doesn't.
Okay, thank you. So Simon Young's going like this for some reason. I don't know what's wrong with him.
Yeah.
But
When somebody does that.
yeah, I don't know what, I think he's got a sore neck or something. Let's see if we can sneak in one more, Simon, shall we? I think in your field, you're clearly making a difference in the world. And I just want you to reflect, is there anything that in a perfect world you would ask either the funders or the public or the scientists so that your impact of your science could be accelerated?
Give us more money.
We can give you more money, but
I was going to say that if a charity says, we want you're obligated to do data sharing, they have to provide some resource with it to do it effectively, to keep an audit trail, to make it approachable, timely, and responsive. And we did it for free, and it's very expensive. It's 50% FTE of a research data manager to provide it if you're going to do that. So funders don't really seem to recognise this, but they love the idea.
Yeah.
And I think going forward, all people, if funders insist, have to allocate money and put a request in for it.
Sure.
I think what would really help our data collection is having clinicians paid to collect data. So if in every memory clinic there was some clinician time put aside, a nurse or a doctor, to do data collection for research, that would make a huge difference.
Happy?
I'm happy.
Everything's perfect.
So on that happy note, I'd like to thank all our speakers today for their contribution.